between the spaces.
Councillor, I have no more questions, but Jeff, one of the delegations is going to be addressing the need or lack thereof of a sidewalk in front of his house. And I'm just wondering if your map, can you bring the map back up to show the actual location of that property?
Sure, yes. Through you, Mr. Chair, it's not a drawing, but it's a figure. It does represent the location. I believe the address we're speaking of is 1915 Notre Dame Drive. Yeah, so according, per this figure, the parking to be removed is highlighted in black, and at the north end of the project.
Okay, thanks very much, Jeff. And we'll go to the delegations now. The first delegation is Steve Kidd. Mr. Kidd. Welcome, Mr. Kidd.
Good morning. Mr. Chairman, members of Planning and Works Committee. I'll comment about that last part of that conversation by Jeff shortly. I want to start my presentation here this morning by asking the question of members of this council and committee who will be actually voting on this construction in St. Agatha. How many of you have actually been there and seen the actual frontage of these properties that are going to be impacted? And I'd like to offer that if, for those who haven't, I would be glad to give you a personal guided tour so we can point out a few things. So, and we can do that anytime between now and the next meeting, and I'd be perfectly happy to accommodate you. So, with that, I'll start my presentation, and I just want to start by saying the village of St. Agatha primarily is made up of single homes and several businesses fronting onto Herb Street, running east and west. Notre Dame Drive, of course, runs north and south, crossing Herb's Road, primarily residential on both sides of the road. My conversation this morning with you will be focused on the north side of Notre Dame, the eastern exposure. So we're talking about the area that the new sidewalk is going to be implemented. Partial sidewalk there now, partial paved rollover shoulder, and some areas with nothing. So with the increased growth in the surrounding communities of Baden, New Hamburg, Foxborough, Wellesley, traffic volume through St. Agatha has increased substantially over the past few years. Both Herb's Road and Notre Dame Drive experience high volumes of truck traffic, heavy truck traffic, to gravel pits and the local landfill site on Herb Street, as well as personal vehicles commuting to the KW area. The increase in traffic volume has changed driver behavior, which includes excessive speeding, passing on the right through the intersection at Herb's Road and Notre Dame. So my conversation here is not to discuss debating the need for these turning lanes. I'm talking about a particular sidewalk situation. I'm speaking today on behalf of the residents who live on the east side of Notre Dame Drive north, who will be impacted by the proposed new sidewalk. There are only 7 homes on the east side of Notre Dame Drive, and this 7-home area covers a distance of 1,455 feet, that's 448 meters, from the St. Agatha School north to the last entrance to the subdivision on the left, which we refer to as the new subdivision. Residents are questioning the need and duplication of a sidewalk on the east side of Notre Dame when a new sidewalk on the west side of Notre Dame will be part of the reconstruction. To support this, the majority of village residents live on the west side of Notre Dame Drive with 3 access streets to service the subdivision. The new west sidewalk will generate the most utilization from the 96 homes and 1 apartment building that are located on the west side of Notre Dame. So you've got 96 homes on the west side, you've got 7 homes on the east side, and the 7 homes on the east side, the proposed sidewalk was going to be a little over a quarter mile. Earlier discussions between the engineering staff and residents conceded that the extension of 370 feet of sidewalk north of the last home, 1925, which Jeff mentioned, was not necessary because this sidewalk would be adjacent to farmland, putting an undue burden on that farmer to shovel 370 feet of sidewalk that was going nowhere. Fortunately, through the input, and the engineering staff has agreed with us that this has been eliminated from the plan. So that means the new sidewalk would go from 1925 south to the edge of the school. And I only measured this from the edge of the school because the school is basically the start, where the school property ends is the start of the residential, where the 7 houses are on the right side. So if you want to look at this, you've got 7 homes over 1,448 feet. It seems like a tremendous expense to put a sidewalk in there to service these people. The cost versus benefit is questionable, notwithstanding the construction carbon footprint negatively impacting the environment from these construction costs and concrete, etc. In addition, the financial savings in construction costs and utility services could be put to use elsewhere. Now, we talked in this last discussion about the fact that there could be a shortage of space in front of the church for this parking. If you eliminated the sidewalk, you automatically pick up a 1.5 meter extra space all along that road. So that brings me to my first slides, which I'd like to talk to you about. This is a view looking north from the current St. Agatha School, which is closed and will eventually be sold because it's for sale right now. This is a view further up the street. Now, if you'll notice the edge of the road on the left side and go right to that tree, that's a black walnut tree, that's the first residence that's impacted. There's 3 houses along this area that are very close to the road. And I'm actually speaking on behalf of these people because they couldn't be here. So if you can imagine an additional 15 feet from the left being taken off this view, and you can appreciate how close the bike lane and or sidewalk would be to these residences. The next shot here will probably give you a little bit better picture. So these homes are very close to the road. I believe the utility pole in that particular picture might exactly be the property line. So imagine these people, these 3 families that have recently moved into these homes in the past few years, how they're going to feel about this traffic flow being that close to them. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody, this is a view going further north where there is no sidewalk. And obviously the region owns this property where that scrub brush is and trees on the right side of your screen. But I've lived in the community for 41 years. We don't see any pedestrian traffic on this side of the road. It's that simple. So let me carry on here. I'm proposing that maintaining the paved shoulder north of the school leading up to these homes would provide some additional parking, which would help out the church situation. And if you remove the fact that you don't need the sidewalk, you know, this is certainly going to help for the addition of these bike lanes. We appreciate the region's mandated guidelines for sidewalks. However, the one-size-fits-all design may not be the appropriate thing to do given the factors discussed here. Recent construction in Petersburg, as we talked about earlier, was completed with sidewalks on one side only, which is working well for those residents following their input. So we're here giving you the similar input. We've got 96 homes on one side that need sidewalks, and we got 7 on the other side that might be questionable. In conclusion, the greatest risk to public safety in St. Agatha is the excessive speeding which is not being enforced. Serious consideration of a 40-kilometer speed limit with enforcement would be an option following this construction. And if anybody of this council wants to come and park in my driveway, I can access a radar gun, and you can witness the speeding that happens on an ongoing basis, day in, day out, truck traffic, you name it. Now, there's one other point I want to make this morning that's just brought to my attention. It's an agricultural comment. Several of the farmers I've talked to since last night and this morning. Here's the problem. The region's proposing a barrier curb which is about this high. Most of the farm equipment that navigates those corners and the road are upwards to 13 to 14 feet wide. Now, the engineering department has advised that the code is that as long as a tractor trailer can get around a corner, a piece of farm equipment should be okay. Well, we've got these tractors today with dual wheels, and with a width of 13 to 14 feet, what they're asking for is, instead of this drop curb, a rollover curb, so that when they get into a narrow spot, the actual equipment can actually mount the curb easier without damaging any equipment to accommodate that width. So that's something from the farming community that I think should be taken into consideration in this. And that concludes what I've got to say. But I do want to talk about speeding. We've talked to the regional police about enforcement. They tell us it's not their mandate to enforce speed limits. They've got other priorities. And this is a very serious problem in St. Agatha. I don't know what we're going to do about it, but some consideration to photo radar or something like that. Photo radar, where you get an instant ticket, automatically provides financial capital the region could use for something else, and it might teach drivers that they need to slow down. I don't even know whether it's legal, but it's something you might want to consider. Thank you.
Okay.
Any questions?
Any questions to Mr. Kidd? I see none. Thank you very much, Mr. Kidd.
That's it?
Yep.
Thank you.
The next delegation is Dave Rollo. Dave, yes? Welcome, Mr. Rollo.
Good morning, Chair. Tom Galloway and members of the Planning and Works Committee. I'm here to speak about the handicap parking in front of the church. I've been a member of the church since wee little guy, and that's 57 years ago. Our church is getting older. People are getting older. I'm one of those who needs handicap, and I didn't want to walk into here because I knew it was going to be too far for me to walk, which is what I'm afraid is going to happen out there if you guys are going to move the parking. I do walk into church every Sunday morning. We've got a full frontal of parking of handicapped people every mass and funerals and weddings, and that's not even enough room. We run out of room for parking, and at funerals sometimes they park up Herb Street on the curb because we've run out of space. I'm very pleased that some of you have been talking about the handicap parking. I really appreciate that. And I'd like to see something come of it so that we can continue to have access for myself and the other handicapped folks that like to come to our church. Not the only bad thing that's happening with this year. I've lived there all my life, so I know everybody. And some of these people are going to lose all the parking out in front of their houses and such. There's got to be something better. Do we really need bike lanes? I don't think so. But that's up to you folks to decide. And we look forward to working with you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rolla. Any questions to Mr. Rolla? Councillor Jaworski?
Thank you. Through the chair, yeah, it's always great to see St. Agatha Church so vibrant and so many people attending there, still so well attended. You mentioned a lot of people use accessible or have the requirement for accessible parking more than just the 2 spots that are there. Just from firsthand knowledge, where do they park? Where do they choose to park?
Well, out in front where they have always parked. Like we've got the 2 spots that are kind of marked as handicapped, and then all the rest just park from there past the front of the rectory and down to what is now the community college. So they do park there. They do park, not the handicapped people so much, but they do park over at Kennedy's Tavern as well for masses and funerals and weddings and such, and we feel that's not right. Kennedy's Tavern has been great to us, letting us use that parking, but I'm not sure how many times that use of that parking has hurt their business. So just wanted to bring that up.
Thank you. Certainly Kennedy's a great institution I think we all know well.
Yeah.
Rolled ribs, yes. Mr. Rolla,
Yeah.
as a user of the accessible parking, the staff are proposing moving those 2 spaces 35 meters to the, I'm going to say north.
Yeah,
probably wrong.
yeah, sure.
What's your response to that? Would that not be usable for you? Then maybe you could also comment on what Councillor Erb has suggested in terms of maybe the opportunity to create the spaces off the road.
Yes. Having to walk, well, I can walk. I've got a prosthetic. But having to walk further is too much for me at this time anyways. Normally we park right out in front of the ramp, and then I walk in and up to the front of the church. And as far as putting a couple spaces on the lawn, I guess that's a Band-Aid. That would give us a couple spaces. But we're talking 6 or 7 or 8 spaces up front there that really are important to us, as well as it's important to us for funerals for the hearse to be able to be there. And I ask that rather than take things away from us, if you guys want to do some good for us, figure out a way to build a parking garage or something so we have parking. I thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, well, we actually have no mandate for parking anywhere.
Yeah.
So we try to accommodate, but we actually don't have a mandate. We have a mandate to provide vehicular traffic, pedestrian and cycling facilities. We don't have a mandate for parking.
Yeah.
Although we do obviously try to do that. The next delegation is Andrew Destler. Welcome, Mr. Destler.
Good morning, Chair Tom Galloway and Planning Works Committee. My name is Andrew Destler. I'm a resident of Wellesley Township, Wellesley actually. I'm speaking on behalf of St. Agatha Roman Catholic Church. I have been a parishioner of St. Agatha Church most of my life. I have been a member of the Finance Committee and the Maintenance Committee for over 30 years. St. Agatha Parish was established in 1834 and has held the distinction of being the first Catholic parish established in Waterloo County. The present Gothic-style church at the corner of Herbs Road in Notre Dame was constructed in 1899. Because of the historical and cultural significance of the region, our parish and church attract many visitors to St. Agatha. We need all the parking that is currently available in the church parking lot and on Notre Dame Drive. Many parishioners or visitors to the church drive from out of town. When they arrive in St. Agatha, they need a place to park. Some of the times this parking is crucial is at funerals, weddings, Christmas services, Easter services, special events such as church dinners, ecumenical services, and meetings. The proposed road construction would remove the street parking directly in front of the church, which includes 2 accessible parking spots as well as across the road on the west side of the road, and these 7 or 8 parking spots upward. This would be done to make way for bicycle lanes and turning lanes on Notre Dame Drive. There are many parishioners who need the use of accessible spaces and the other street parking, front parking, which is available at and near the church. Some of the reasons for this include knee replacement, hip replacement, vertigo, multiple sclerosis, using a walker, cane, or wheelchair, shortness of breath or walking inability to climb stairs, and other health conditions or serious illnesses such as cancer and heart disease. The 2 accessible spaces are not adequate for the number of elderly and disabled. We are using all the spaces in front of the church and the rectory for the 3 weekend masses, and walking upgrade from the parking lot is suggested by Mr. Jeff Ninehouse, the planning engineer. It's not really suitable. It's all upgrade from there. You get out of the car and you're walking upgrade, upgrade, upgrade. And the winds are strong there. They blew the steel roof off in the spring. Coming around the corner, the winds are great. So the people would be facing, coming up into the wind, all the way up into from there if they were handicapped. The risks of injury from falls, especially during the winter or on windy days, is greatly increased if street parking is taken away. Removing the parking in front of the church would deny some of our disabled and elderly parishioners the freedom to worship at St. Agatha Church and put others at grave risk of injury. In other areas of the region where it is not feasible to add separate bicycle lanes, the roadway is painted with a green bicycle symbol and designated as a bike path. This precedent could be implemented in St. Agatha as well. If the roads were designated as a bike path and painted with the green block and bicycle symbol, the parking could be kept for those who are in most of need. The road in front of the church and up to St. Anne should be shared bicycle trucks, cars, trucks, and farm equipment with no separate bike lanes. If it was done on Herbs Road, it would also leave the green space with the trees on it on the north side of Herbs Street. So if you designate both of the roads as bicycle and traffic, it'd help. Our first duty is to care for those most in need in our community. The parking we have now is what is needed. Please do not remove the parking, especially the street front parking. The elderly and disabled need it. Many of us will be in their shoes very soon. Having a shared roadway, as on many of the roads in the region, is the right thing to do as far as I'm concerned. I have spoken to Mayor Les Armstrong and Mayor Joe Nowak about this, and I also suggested to Mr. Jeff Ninehouse, please be considerate. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Destler. Any questions? I'm seeing none. Thank you very much then, sir. Okay, we've had the staff presentation, the delegations. I'll open it for debate. I would ask people to keep in mind what staff have said in terms of the left turn lanes being, they're advisable, but they're also could be taken out of the scenario to provide for the parking. And then there's also the suggestion that Councillor Erb has risen. Councillor Jowett.
So I'm just waiting for you to get to the consent agenda, sir. I'm just waiting for you to get to the consent agenda. I'm just a little bit ahead of the curve.
What do you mean to get to the consent agenda? We're on this.
I want to pull something.
Hmm?
I just want to pull something.
Well, we'll do that after.
Yeah.
We're dealing with this matter now, so then
Sorry,
we'll
yeah,
get.
I know, I was just a little quick with my finger.
Okay, so you have nothing on this? Okay.
So I was just getting it right.
Right, okay. Councillor Foxton?
Thank you, through the chair. I want to thank Councillor Lorenz for bringing up the GRAC, the Accessibility Committee.
Yeah.
I understand the need for bike lanes and the want for bike lanes and the environment and all our greening projects. But I also see the need for disability and for seniors and those that have issues and can't walk the distance. And also, sharing, I think, makes the most sense to me because we're asking for that parking at certain times. It's not 24/7, you know, and if the bikers, the very fit bikers, could either bike around the parked cars or get off their bikes and walk their bikes a few feet, they would still be doing active transportation. So I think that they're more able to be compassionate in this situation rather than the other way around. And I fear that, okay, let's tell the truth, I'm a churchgoer. Another thing is I only have one leg. And I totally understand where these people are coming from. And if our society is inclusive, then this is an issue we seriously have to look at.
Councillor Strickland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As I mentioned earlier, I understand what staff's trying to do here in terms of accommodating a variety of user groups and, you know, cyclists and motorists and pedestrians and so on. I'm mostly concerned about the accessibility parking spots in the plan there. And I think it would be advisable for us to refer this to GRAC, or Grand River Accessibility Advisory Committee, to provide comment and input on the accessible parking spot plan, for lack of a better word. And I would just limit the scope of that input to GRAC around the accessible parking spots and what our plan is, and they could provide input into that plan and some suggestions on how best to accommodate. I don't know what the optimum distances are for accessible parking spots to doorways and entranceways. I don't know how accessible the side door is of the church, the front door is of the church. So I think it'd be important to get that input from that committee, which provides us with expert advice on these kinds of things. So I would move that we refer it to GRAC for further input around the accessible parking spots.
Okay, I'll deal with, can we put that on hold,
Yeah, sure.
Councillor Strickland, until we get, I've got quite a number of speakers. I think there could be things added to that referral as well.
Sure.
Councillor Shantz.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to, just a minute. Sorry. I'd like to speak to a couple of things that have been raised with the delegations. The first one I'll just mention briefly, and that's speeding, and I've talked about it before. Coming into all of our settlements, speeding is a problem. People are getting from A to B and they don't slow down, and I'd love to see some kind of a strategy for helping to slow people down, something other than islands in our rural communities. Secondly, farm equipment. So recently I saw a piece of farm equipment that took up the buggy lane to the center line. They are big pieces of equipment, and so we really do need to think about them separate from transport trucks and look at that. So what I'm What I'm wondering here for this particular situation is, can we use a multi-use trail on the north side? And I know when we've talked about that before, one of the reasons you're cautious about multi-use trails is because of the number of driveways and that kind of thing. But on the, what side is that? Is that the east side of Notre Dame? There's not a lot of houses, so can we use a multi-use trail? I think the parking spaces are important. They're important to the church and they're important for accessibility. And I would certainly support a referral to GRAC on that.
Councillor Armstrong.
Yes, I can understand this. The problem I have is that I feel there needs to be more conversation. There definitely does. In Petersburg, there was a lot more conversation. I've heard several people tell me that they did not receive some of the notices. The notices were left on windy days, and a lot of people didn't receive it. The last notice, the people at the church explained that they didn't know it, except for the custodian happened to find it hidden in a corner someplace on the property, in one of the doorways that is not frequented. So notification of it was poor. These parking spaces are very important. We went through this in Petersburg. There was a lot more conversation. I mean, it extended the project a little bit, but the conversation came to a reasonable ending and considerations. I understand staff create a program where in urban areas the roads are to be in such a uniform manner, but not all urban areas are the same, and this is a rural urban area, and I think at this point in time, I think we need to listen more to the people who live there than to the people who sometimes visit there. And I think that's part of the problem, is that the people that live there feel they're not being heard. So I think at appropriate time, I would move a deferral of this until we have more conversation. I think that needs to be done. Thank you.
Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Chair Galloway. Further to Councillor Armstrong's comments, I would just hope that any referral to GRAC would also include active conversations with both the clergy and the congregation at the church, because it seems to me that there's an issue of, we've heard from one of the parishioners, of actual availability of parking and accessible parking spots. I would hope that if we're going to look at this, we look at it in a holistic manner.
Councillor Harris.
Yeah, I'll second Councillor Strickland's motion and then expand on that to include the items that Chair Redmond indicated.
Okay, so we have the motion to refer Councillor Strickland put forward. I'm wondering if we could, Councillor Strickland, add to that further conversation with the parish in relation to the parking, but also in terms of any opportunity there may be off-road in that respect. I also wonder if we could add staff to look at, in an engineering way, the elimination of the left turn lane, whether or not that would require the opposing left turn lane to be eliminated as well. There may be a way of salvaging the opposing left turn lane if we had to sacrifice the left turn lane in front of the church. If we can add those things, and one further thing I've noted is the staff to take another look at the movement of agricultural equipment to consider. Okay, so with the, okay, so we have some more speakers. Councillor Strickland?
I'm fine with those friendly amendments, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Councillor Erb?
I support the motion. I just a question.
You want to second the motion? Yeah, I need a seconder, that's all. Oh, like, okay, sorry. Councillor Erb?
If the existing handicap spaces, am I correct that they would be on a regional road right-of-way? And what the liability of that is and would continue to be, and which would give us all the more incentive to try and find something maybe off the right-of-way. I'm not sure what the precedent is for handicap spaces being on regional right-of-ways, but if that's a Pardon?
Does staff have a response to that? Is this unique in the region? No, we have other places where we're providing.
Well, this is a bit unique in that there's no additional liability, but these spaces, while they're marked as handicapped spaces, are not actually designated as handicapped spaces. So we're not sure who placed the markings out there. They are there now. And if we move them or if we leave them in place where they are, we would go through the process of coming to council and actually designating them. But currently, they are actually not legal handicap spaces.
And maybe, Ms. Arnold, I don't know if you have an opinion, but if we designate them in the bylaw, then the liability issue is not, or is there always liability?
One of the reasons, and maybe the primary reason for wanting them obviously designated and legal in the bylaw is then there can be enforcement in terms of fairly significant penalties if someone parks there without a proper permit would be the situation. So I think no matter what in this situation, we would want to certainly work to regularize the parking situation.
And that would be a consideration for the church as well. I think you have to take that into consideration in this debate as well. Currently, those are unenforceable. So if you have regular parishioners using them or other people coming for weddings and that, it's not enforceable. So you may want to have enforceable spaces, or you may not want to have enforceable spaces, depending on your point of view.
We will look at the option of placing those parking spots in the location you mentioned, Councillor Weidman, but I think the bigger issue will actually be access, because that will require an entrance. That's on private property. That will require an entrance, and what the location of that entrance is with respect to the intersection. That may be the bigger issue of having people turn in, but we will review that option.
Okay, Councillor Nowak.
No, I think you mentioned, the chair mentioned the possibility in this Councillor Strickland's amendment to deal with eliminating the left turn lanes. Is that what your suggestion was? I'm just wondering, I kind of like to see, I'd like to see the best of both worlds here, where we have the left turn lanes, because I think they're important, but I don't want to eliminate the parking spots as well. So is there a way of doing both? Well, and can we look at that? Is it the bike lanes, if they were removed, would that accommodate both? That's a question I would have.
Well, we can ask staff to look at whether or not everything can be accommodated, but my understanding is something would have to give. Either the parking has to give, the bike lane has to give, or the left turn has to give. And so if it was up to me, it would be the left turn lane, but that's a decision for council.
Yeah, so I think if it was up, that'll be a decision for council. I think if it was up to me, it would be the bike lane that would have to be moved. Or well,
that'll be debate.
And
wouldn't be my choice. But
Councillor Shantz has a good suggestion. Maybe we can turn that into a multi-use trail. And that I don't know whether that would solve the problem or not. But
we can ask staff. We can ask staff to look at that again. We have. I'm not sure how much time we have, but this was only planned for fall construction, so.
You gain 1.5 meters.
So, sorry, sir, you can't speak from the audience. So ask staff to bring this back the next cycle or whatever.
We'll have to look at schedule. We definitely will not be back the next cycle.
Okay.
I mean, for us to organize this, I suspect we're going to lose at least 2 months to do this level of review. I suspect this puts construction this year into extreme jeopardy, and more than likely we're looking at construction next year. I think that's realistic. I mean, if at the end of it, it gets us to a better solution,
it's not the end.
That's fine.
Yeah, it's not the end of the world. Councillor Foxton.
Thank you. Just to note that when the region is doing Northumberland Street and Ayr, they have designated handicap spots. So the region does put in handicap spots on their regional roads, and they are just fine. The other thing is about the large farm vehicles, and Councillor Shantz is absolutely correct. They are extremely large. If we're going to start to build our roads to meet them, I would suggest we're going to have to rip up all our roads, no matter where they are, because they are longer than a complete lane, or wider than a complete lane. They are rarely used. They are on rare occasions. Even the farmers don't like to move them in big distances because they are costly for the farmers to move them. But when they do, it's rare. I think we cannot build a road to meet the exceptional rareness of these.
Councillor Armstrong?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that there is further conversation, because there is more to this than just the handicap parking. But I think that there are solutions. I mean, the signal lights, there's advanced greens, extended greens that can be utilized to accommodate if you don't have the left turn lane. If you have those, that'll help the flow of traffic. There are options out there to do this. So, like I said, I want to make sure that there is further conversation for all of these. If it puts off the construction another year, we're quite used to that in Wilmot. The reconstruction in Petersburg went an extra 2 years. Snyder's Road in Baden is now 3 to 4 years since it was first spoken of. So we're used to that. So I think that we're happy to go that extra mile for the extra time. So, but I really am concerned that we don't have a lot more conversation with the overall project and not just that one.
Councillor Clark?
Thanks, Chair. I know we're going to have an opportunity to debate this, and I don't really want to get into that at this point. I do just want to point out, though, that if speeding is a problem, and I think we all know that it is, that to me emphasizes why sidewalks and cycling infrastructure is especially important. And I would also suggest that we know that narrowing roadways, or at least the appearance of narrowing roadways, does slow down traffic. And I would argue that that's maybe a reason that the elimination of the turning lanes would be desirable in terms of slowing down traffic.
Councillor Shantz?
Thank you, and I know we're not really debating this, but I want to take a second to respond to Councillor Foxton on the farm equipment. And I wasn't suggesting we should engineer all our roads for the farm equipment, but if there are modifications that can make it easier for them, such as rollover curbs, then I think we need to look at that, especially for our rural areas.
Okay, I'll call the question for the referral. All in favor? Okay, that's carried. Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for coming. I appreciate the issue. I've been on the Finance and Maintenance Committee of Blessed Sacrament Church for 35 years, so I'm familiar with some of these issues. We're in the process of rebuilding our parking lot, look forward to that. But this now means that this is going back to staff. You probably got the gist of the conversation. It may well put off the construction to next season, but that's not the end of the world, and hopefully we can come up with a satisfactory solution for all the needs for this particular project. Thanks for coming. The next item we're going to deal with is the Region of Waterloo Road Safety Program update. We have a delegation, but we'll do the staff report first, the staff presentation, and then we'll have our delegation to speak to it. So, Mr. Henderson.
Good morning, through you, Mr. Chair. I'm here to present the region's road safety program, and more specifically the region's countermeasures program to enhance safety at intersections and other locations throughout the region. The region's road safety program is a Vision Zero program. in that it aligns with the strategic vision of Vision Zero and recognizing that collisions will occur, that collisions are a product of driver behavior, that they are a product of the region's road design choice, and that collisions resulting in fatal and serious injuries are preventable. Key elements of the region's road safety program is that we're proud to say that it's a science-based program. It really is data-driven. We use historical collision data to really drill down and to identify where problems are occurring and to fix those problematic locations. And we follow a 3E model, more specifically engineering, education, and enforcement initiatives. Speaking about engineering initiatives, we have a network screening process that I presented in our last cycle about the annual collision report. We identify those locations, rank collision locations and rank them so that we can have our staff identify where they should be paying attention and specifically promoting their resources and efforts into improving locations. We have the Region's Road Safety Countermeasures Program, which I'm really speaking to today about. We rank collisions by impact type. We do thorough fatal collision reviews whenever we see fatal collisions occurring on regional roads. And as mentioned in our last cycle, we have a transportation capital program where every regional road project is specifically looked at for road safety improvements during the design, and those improvements take place during the reconstruction of a road on every single regional road project. We have policies and systemic programs. We have staff and we work with our university counterparts on ongoing research. We collaborate with our university partners as well. And we're always reassessing our ongoing policies and practices to determine where we need to make improvements. And where industry practices don't have any good guidance, we do run pilot projects where we feel that we can make safety improvements on regional roads. We have ongoing and extensive education campaigns. These are just a number of the campaigns that we've done over the years. It's quite a long list. I'm not going to go over the list, but most recent campaign that we're soon to be wrapping up on is the Extra Sec Check campaign. And historically speaking, we've collaborated with our public health and Waterloo Regional Police Services on an ongoing basis, and we've partnered up with our area municipal staff on a number of occasions. This is a list of mechanisms in which we've provided our education throughout the region over the years. I'm not going to go over the list, but they're there for your information. We work, as I mentioned, collaboratively with our Waterloo Regional Police Services. We have a program called STEP, which specifically is a data-driven process where regional staff and area municipal staff will identify locations in need of enhanced enforcement where we see speeding as a problem or collisions being caused by speeding issues. As you know, we have a red light camera program where automated enforcement takes place at signalized intersections where people run red lights. And soon we have a pending automated speed enforcement program where staff will be coming to committee with a recommendation on the region of Waterloo's anticipated automated speed enforcement program. More specifically, what I'm here to talk about today is the region's countermeasures program, where we've identified underperforming intersections and locations that are in need of safety enhancements. Specifically, we identify pedestrian collision locations as well as cycling and motor vehicle collision locations that are in most need of safety improvements. These locations that staff have identified we see are as in most need of safety improvements. They're most likely to benefit from safety improvements that we determine, and they're most likely to provide the greatest return on the investment that we put into these locations, meaning the money that we put in specifically for countermeasures that are identified to improve these locations, we'll likely see a good return on the value that we're putting into it. Regional staff, when they're looking at locations, will only consider proven and statistically reliable safety countermeasures. Where countermeasures may not be an industry standard, or where we're struggling to find a countermeasure that is meant to improve a location, if we feel strong enough where we can consider a pilot program to enhance the safety, if we feel that there's benefit, we will consider pilot programs where it may not be an industry standard. When we drive into the details and look at the way collisions happen on our roadways, some of the factors that contribute to collisions, in particular involving pedestrian collision locations, the common contributing factors that are associated with pedestrian collisions they typically happen at traffic signalized locations. They involve turning motorists, making turns, not observing a pedestrian in the crosswalk. And crosswalks are primarily where pedestrians are hit at signalized intersections. With cycling and collision locations, it's very similar to the pedestrian issue. The common factors that are involved in cycling collisions are that they typically occur at traffic signalized locations, again involving turning motorists, not observing or expecting cyclists to be riding through a crosswalk at a signalized intersection. Another issue that we've noticed with cycling collision locations are a common factor is grade, where cyclists can pick up speed going down a hill, approaching a signalized intersection and entering those intersections with speed and catching drivers off guard is a common issue. With motor vehicle collisions, the common theme is traffic signals are again another contributing factor. And the most common type of collision that is causing injury on our regional roads is rear-end collision at signalized intersections. So I'm not going to get into the details about what countermeasures we will be applying at every specific location that we've identified in this report, but I'm going to go over I'm just going to summarize some of the key initiatives that we will be applying to these locations. So when we're looking at our pedestrian collision prone locations, the countermeasures that we will be applying at these locations to enhance safety include leading pedestrian intervals, which are a signal phase that gives pedestrians the ability to enter the intersection before motorized vehicles do. They establish their presence within an intersection, and therefore motorists are more likely to observe and pay attention to those pedestrians, thereby enhancing the safety at those locations. Offset crosswalks are another mechanism. It's just offsetting the crosswalks a little bit further back from the intersection to provide drivers a little more ability to observe and react to a crossing pedestrian and stop if necessary. We're also going to be considering no right turn on red prohibitions at a few select locations. This mechanism not only has the ability to enhance safety for pedestrians and cyclists, it also has the ability to enhance safety for motorists as well. And ladder crosswalks. We've been using ladder crosswalks for a number of years to enhance safety for pedestrians at signalized intersections. It helps drivers detect the areas where pedestrians may be. When we're looking at cycling countermeasures, again, as I mentioned, no right turn on red prohibitions can enhance safety for cyclists. We've been using, for the last 2 or 3 years, we've been using cyclist warning signs to provide cyclists a notification that they're entering an area where they might want to pay attention a little bit more, specifically at intersections and specifically at tangential sections where there's a lot of driveways where we've had a history of cyclists being hit by entering and exiting drivers from private access. And as I mentioned, we have a good collaborative working relationship with our police, so we're stepping up enforcement at select locations. When we're looking at motor vehicle safety countermeasures, we're looking at left turn, fully protected left turn phasing at selected intersections. That means there's a difference between fully protected left turns and protected permissive phasing. Fully protected left turn phasing gives drivers one opportunity to turn left, and then they have to pay attention to that signal and stop. It's a very effective countermeasure, and it's had a history of reducing left turn collisions by almost as much up to about 99%. We're looking at potential roundabouts in certain locations, larger signal heads in a few locations. We're about to, in some locations where we're having rear-end collision problems on Homer Watson Boulevard, where there's a overrepresentation of rear-end collisions likely associated with the speed of that roadway. We're going to pilot high-friction asphalt, which helps increase the friction of the surface and help drivers stop a little faster, shorter distances. And again, we're recommending an additional red light camera at the intersection of King Street and Bishop Street in Cambridge. When we look at ourselves, I'm often asked, how do we compare to other municipalities or locations? And with the Vision Zero aspect, we've provided this information before to Regional Council, just to put ourselves and give some context on how regional roads operate compared to other places. This is looking at fatal collisions per capita. So when we compare our fatal collisions per capita, 1,000 population, we're down in the range of about one fatal collision per 100,000 people per year. So there's about 600,000 people in the region now, and we had about 6 collisions in 2018. So that results in a rate of one collision per 100,000 people. When we compare ourselves to other municipalities across Ontario, we're seeing good things. This is looking at collisions, not just fatal collisions like in the last slide, but when we look at our overall collisions, we're generally faring better than other municipalities in Ontario consistently throughout the years. As I've mentioned in previous presentations, we're really concentrating our efforts and looking into long-term trends to make sure that our policies and our practices are leading us in the right direction. So when we're looking at fatal collisions, the trends are looking very positive, and they continue to do so over the more recent years, and we're now looking at 10-year years as well. And the trend over the long term has been consistently dropping. I should mention before I start talking about our cycling collisions that about 10 years ago we did not fund a safety countermeasures program for cycling-related collisions. And the region established funding about 10 years ago to apply safety countermeasures to specifically target and address and enhance safety for cycling over the last 10 years. And based on the trends over the last 10 years in collisions involving cyclists, it appears that our efforts and the budgets that were being put forward to address cycling collisions is proving favorable and working. When we look at pedestrian collisions over the long term trend doesn't appear so positive, but again, like cycling countermeasures program, we didn't have a pedestrian countermeasures program or funding specifically targeted for enhancing safety for pedestrians at signalized intersections until about 10 years ago. And you can see by the trends that over the last 10 years, it appears that budget and program are changing the trajectory of pedestrian collisions in the long term, and we're hoping to see that trajectory change for the positive going into the future. When we look at our next steps, we will be, in the spring, we'll be starting to implement the planned countermeasures that we've identified. As always, we always monitor the effectiveness of the countermeasures and the safety improvements that we install. We just don't install and then walk away and forget about them. We make sure that they're actually working and doing what they're supposed to. Going forward, we're really putting our efforts and emphasis in the area of the pedestrian realm and working towards further enhancing pedestrian safety, specifically at signalized intersections where we're seeing issues. So we'll be stepping up our efforts and programs and putting more countermeasures at signalized intersections to change that trajectory of the trend. And lastly, we are about to, likely in the next early spring or sooner, about to make a recommendation to Regional Council about automated speed enforcement program in concert with our local area municipalities about how we're planning to roll out automated speed enforcement in the region of Waterloo. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, well, we'll do those questions after the delegation, Bob.
Okay.
So I'm going to go right to the delegation, then we can consider questions to the delegation, and then to yourself. I have quite a list of speakers already. So the delegation, Emily Slofstra. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you. Good morning, Council and Chair Galloway. If you don't mind, I'd like to speak to a few items on the agenda, if that's okay. Just kind of touch on a few of them. Starting with congratulations on this project that Dr. Dean spoke about earlier today. I'm very excited that Councillor Galloway and others from this community will get to go to Copenhagen. It's one of the first places I visited when I went to Europe over 10 years ago. And I was already into cycling at the time, but obviously it helped to kind of grow my interest in sustainable, healthy communities. So I'm really excited to see what comes from that, and I hope you're all able to attend some of the sessions afterwards to so that Councillor Galloway and others can share their learnings. So then getting into the road safety program, we were really pleased with what we read in the agenda this time for this program. It's really nice to be able to read through these different items and see that they are all moving in the right direction and seeing that there are fewer collisions. I know that that's just on regional roads, those statistics, so I know that there are potentially more collisions that have happened in the region, as far as I'm aware. So it's not necessarily a full picture, but I think we are moving in the right direction. The no right turn on red, I think, will be really important for preventing some collisions, and I think expanding that hopefully will be really beneficial for cyclists and for pedestrians and for reducing collisions. I've just listed some of those things there that the staff have also gone over, and I think there's a lot of great plans going forward for this. And then we also touched on the 3 E's, the engineering, education, and enforcement. And I think that enforcement piece is going to be the really big thing that's missing with this. If we're not ticketing people for turning right on a red without stopping and looking and making sure that it's clear, or for following the signs, I don't think we're going to get very far, and we're not going to be preventing collisions. So if there's anything creative solutions we can do to come up with so that it's not just armed officers out there figuring out ways that we can improve traffic and reduce speeding. I know we just heard from residents of St. Agatha as well, where there's speeding issues all over the region, and we're not seeing it being reduced. We're seeing an increase in pedestrian collisions. So it would be interesting to see if there are some ways that we can creatively enforce traffic issues into the future. The one thing that we are less thrilled about within these countermeasures is these signs for cyclists. We did talk to staff about this, and we have heard that where these signs have been implemented, there have been no collisions since. So where these have gone up at various intersections around the region, saying for cyclists who are biking on the sidewalk, which, as we know, is not actually legal, when they do reach an intersection, these signs indicate that they should look for vehicles, or if they're at driveways. So on the one hand, it kind of encourages people to bike on the sidewalk, but it also shows that they're put up in areas where there is no infrastructure, so people don't have options. So it kind of recognizes that we understand why you're biking on the sidewalk. They're not very aesthetically pleasing, these signs. So going forward, we'd like to ideally see improved infrastructure in the areas where these signs are put in, but we do understand why they're needed at this time. Another item on the agenda today is the Victoria Street Multi-Use Trail. We went through and we were wondering if there were going to be any issues, things we were going to have to come to council about to say that we're not happy with the plans or anything, but we're actually quite pleased with it, especially with the addition of cross rides. So this is an example of the cross ride from Bridgeport Street that was put in this past year. So I think seeing these along this multi-use trail will be really great. Otherwise, cyclists technically they would have to dismount at every single crossing. So as long as people are going slowly and looking both ways and everything, and vehicles are stopping, I think this will be a really great addition to Victoria Street. One thing I'd like to propose for the region is putting up signs about how to use shared pathways. So I know that the City of Waterloo has these on some of their multi-use trails. This is just an example, I'm not even sure where it's from, about just how to share a pedestrian and cycle path. So something about how to use your bell, because a lot of people don't know what to do when they hear a bell, or how to use a bell, or just how to indicate to, if you don't have a bell, how to indicate to other path users that you are coming and that you would like to pass them. Or to stay to the right, just kind of starting to work on this culture of how to use trails and how to share trails and pathways. So if that's something that could be included in future projects, I think that would be really beneficial to the culture of active transportation in the region. I'd also like to touch on Notre Road, as we just heard. Obviously, I'm a fan of the bike lanes going in this area. Shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. Erb Street is one of the few streets out of the city that actually has bike lanes all the way out into the country. So I think it's really popular for road cyclists, and there are actually many cyclists who are differently abled. Many people, it's not easy to dismount a bike. They may be riding because they have a disability, and it's easier for them to ride and get exercise that way than to walk or to use other forms of activity. And I know several of these cyclists myself. So I think that suggesting that people could just dismount and walk around vehicles, especially where in an area where we have just talked about how they're speeding, I don't know if that's the best solution. Something like a Sharrow on the road in this area would only work if you had 40-kilometer roads with speed enforcement and all that kind of thing. I'm not sure that that's the best route to go. Something like an on-road bike lane is also not ideal for many types of cyclists, but because this is such a popular area for road cyclists, I don't think it's a terrible solution, and I think it would be one of the better options, but I think it's something worth exploring. And we've talked about how there's going to be sort of a minimum grid map going forward. So if we knew which of the rural routes were going to be sort of the priority, this might help determine this. So if this is one of our key cycling routes to help get people out into the townships for tourism, I actually used to work in St. Agatha, and it's where I got to know my now spouse, and he would actually bike out there to the garden we worked at, and I would pass him in my SUV, and he'd be biking. This is before there were any bike lanes of any sort. So I think that there are people who bike out there, who bike to the city for work, not just for recreation or for tourism. Hold the Line Festival was held out there 2 years ago, and a lot of people biked out that way as well. So I think having these on-road bike lanes at least is something. If we could protect them, put in some trails, that would be ideal as well. But I hope that this project will include active transportation in some form. Finally, the transit hub, just a little note on that. Just hopefully going forward, we will see the active transportation components included in this as well. I know Duke Street has been quite contentious. That's the street that I live on. So ideally, we will see some sort of pedestrian and cyclist, either underpass or level crossing. And I think that's, if that street is going to be closed, that's something that definitely needs to be considered. And hopefully, we'll get at least a clearer vision of what that will be. I know that right now there's a lot of concerns from residents just because we don't know what the plan is. And I know we've been meeting with the region for several years now, and other people have been meeting for much longer. So I think we just need a clearer vision of what that's going to look like. I know these are just renderings, but knowing a little bit more in detail what the Waterloo Street crossing or connection will look like, as well as the Duke Street connection, I think will really help to ease some concerns there. And that's it. Those are all the items that we mostly were pretty satisfied with. I think that the region's moving in the right direction for active transportation, and we're pretty excited. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Emily. If you just want to take a seat,
sure.
I'm going to have people ask questions. They may want to ask you, they no doubt want to ask Mr. Henderson. So we'll go back and forth as the speakers list dictates. So the first question is, Councillor Babbitt.
Thank you very much, Chair Galloway. My question's to staff. Thanks for the presentation, and it certainly gave us a good overview in terms of some of the work that we're doing. There's really three things that I want to touch on. You referenced the speed enforcement coming back, sometime later this spring, and I guess I just want to. I know there's issues and concerns around how it's going to be handled in terms of court administration and workload and so on, from what I understand. But I really want to urge staff to not be too small c conservative in terms of their approach. There's certainly in our municipality, and I would anticipate it's a similar story in the others. There's a lot of expectation being put around this and getting it implemented as quickly as possible. Not just one or two cameras, but something more significant than that. Traffic issues are probably the single biggest issue that area councillors hear about in their wards. And I think the fact that we can now put these in school zones and in community safety zones and so on is a tool that we're really looking to be able to influence. So as staff work to finalize that, their work on that and that report, I guess I would just hope that it's not too conservative. I mean, and if it is, I guess it'll be ultimately up to council to deal with it and process it accordingly. Second one is, can you just remind me where we're at on the issue of school buses and cameras? I just can't remember where that whole issue is. Are we waiting for the province to okay that, or where is that issue?
Who can answer that? Is that?
So I'll take an attempt to answer that one. It has come across my desk to my attention. However, it's a provincial initiative that needs the province to take initiative on. The steering committees that I usually work on with the province and other municipalities across the province, whenever there's a collective push for an issue, the municipalities usually work together and organize a committee to push these things forward. I'm not aware of a large collective push across the province for bus enforcement. And I know there's been discussion to have the school boards lead that program as well.
Okay, so at this point, to the best of your knowledge, the authority doesn't exist yet, and it's something that would need to be advocated for.
Correct.
Okay. And then the last one is just in terms of your presentation. I know we talked about this, I believe it was last term. At the start of your presentation today, you referenced that our road safety program is a Vision Zero program, but we don't call it a Vision Zero program, which was the recommendation, as I recall, last time around. And this is an issue that increasingly I'm thinking we may want to revisit. When you look across the country, all the major urban centers have adopted Vision Zero and are using it. It started with Edmonton in 2015, Hamilton, London, Ottawa, Toronto, Saskatoon, Montreal, Victoria, Halifax. And it would seem to me that there's something to be said about being aligned with our fellow municipalities, both in Ontario and across the country, but also aligned with common messaging. So, I've seen certainly as I've traveled in different jurisdictions, the highway signs and so on, referencing, slow down, Vision Zero, blah, 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 and so on. And so it becomes a common naming mechanism that everybody is familiar with. And so I'm just wondering, what would it take for us to revisit that?
Well, just to respond to that, I would say that those municipalities that are adopting a Vision Zero program are essentially catching up with the region of Waterloo. We've been having a road safety program for decades, and it's been recognized by municipalities across the province as being the gold standard for a road safety program. So a lot of those municipalities didn't have safety programs at all, and therefore had to do something, and a lot of those municipalities adopted a Vision Zero brand.
Right, that wasn't, no offense, that wasn't the question I asked. My question was if we wanted to rebrand ourselves and so that we're consistent with other municipalities, because I think there is some value there, what would it take for that to happen?
Well, I think, I'm not sure that's a staff question or an answer. I think that it's something you could propose. We could develop some kind of discussion on that. I would say to you that we did discuss it during the strategic planning process that we just currently or recently approved, but it doesn't preclude us from revisiting it but I'm not sure that would be a staff initiative. It would be something that you or others would initiate. Councillor Nowak has been also advocating or speaking to the Vision Zero matter for some time as well. So that's something we could certainly put into a process if council felt it was necessary.
So it would simply take a motion of council to rebrand it, and staff would then go ahead and proceed with that, or?
Well,
that's why I'm asking, like, what's the work that's involved?
Yeah, we would ask staff to do up a report, I suspect, on Vision Zero. What is it? I think we all know, but who has it? You've identified it, and what would it take for the region to adopt it?
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Councillor Strickland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Bob, and thanks very much for this report. And I think our approach and staff's approach to monitoring all the intersections where we have these kinds of collisions with vehicles, pedestrians, and cyclists, and then coming back sometime later with planned countermeasures has really showed the results in terms of our overall statistics, and the trend lines are down for fatal collisions and collisions of all sorts. There's some areas where we need some work. And I'm particularly reminded, for years, University and King used to lead for pedestrian collisions, and we put the pedestrian countdown signals in there, and then we put the offset crosswalks, and now it's not on the top 10. There's still some work needs to be done on University Avenue, of course, but I think that's really, really good work that we've done there in terms of these countermeasures to affect our overall road safety. I am, however, curious about Homer Watts and a block line. And I know when we had the discussion some weeks ago, when we looked at the overall report, that has led, in terms of number of collisions, for, I don't know, 5 years in a row. And now I see it comes back, and there's no additional countermeasures planned. So I'm just curious as to what staff's thinking is around that.
Well, we've thrown a lot of countermeasures at that intersection and worked closely with council on many ideas that came out and were implemented at that intersection. The one thing I'll advocate and always identify for roundabouts is that they predominantly will nullify the possibility of a fatal collision. And roundabouts, again, are a better environment for pedestrians as well in terms of reducing collisions. So you have to look at the overall picture for that intersection as well. We need to be reminded about the fact that when that intersection operated as a signalized intersection, it was also identified when it operated as a signal as being the worst location in the region prior to being a roundabout. With all the new development that is also arising and surfacing around that, roundabout volumes are increasing, so we need to take that into account as well.
So, I understand all of that, Bob, and I know we put a lot of effort into the countermeasures that are there presently, probably more than any other roundabout in the region. And I understand the efficacy of the safety of roundabouts compared to signalized intersections and the lack of fatal collisions. But if I recall from our previous report, the number of collisions at this roundabout was like thousands more over a 5-year period than others. So it continues to be a problem. And I would just like to see staff go back and have another look at this roundabout and see if there's anything else we can do. I don't know if it's an overall comprehensive review of the countermeasures that are in place. There's lots of variables related to this roundabout in terms of, is it the right landscaping that's in the center of the roundabout? The sight lines, the roundabout is kind of in a valley, so the sight lines aren't the greatest exiting and entering the roundabout. So I would like to see staff go back and take another look at this and see if there's something we can do in terms of adjusting the countermeasures that are there now and or adding new ones. So I don't know what the best mechanism to do that, Mr. Chairman, is, if I need a motion or if I can give a direction to staff.
I think we can provide direction.
Okay. So if we can take that as direction with the support of my colleagues, I would really like to see something come back and have staff have a closer look at this roundabout.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think we can take that as direction. Councillor Jaworski.
Well, thank you. Through the chair, I will follow in the footsteps of Councillor Strickland in congratulating staff on University and King in Waterloo. I think that was a key success there. It was like #1 as far as I recall. And yet there's even many more pedestrians there than ever before, and it's no longer on the list. I might think with the bike lane pilot there, that has even improved it because it's traffic has slowed down and that. So I'm just wondering if staff could additionally monitor that area, or during the bike lane pilot, monitor that area to see what changes have happened if the bike lane pilot provides additional slowing of traffic in that area. So that would be #1. And then #2 is leading pedestrian intervals. Do we use these already or in the region?
Yeah, we started our program out targeting signalized intersections within school zones, and we've expanded that program to include locations that have been identified in our countermeasures report and our annual collision report for locations that would benefit from it. We're actually considering expanding it even further now to include signalized intersections along the Ion route as well. So presently we have about 60 signalized intersections that have leading pedestrian intervals operating.
Thank you. And then one question for Emily. Emily there.
Emily, question for you.
Well, one, thank you for always coming out. You're always certainly appreciated here. Your calm, cool, collected, informative approach is certainly the way to go, and you exemplify that. And I think you even have winter events going on with Cycle Waterloo Region. I think even maybe Councillor Galloway has attended some. Education. That has come up in numerous presentations and even came up earlier today, that education is key to get people to be inspired. I think it's like something like 50 or 60% are wannabe cyclists, but they just don't. Cycle Waterloo Region, do you have any initiatives, thoughts, mandates in that area? Or is it mostly advocacy? Maybe you could just talk about education.
Sure. And you mean education to get more people biking versus biking differently if they already bike. One of the reasons why we started is to get more infrastructure, because a lot of people just don't feel safe biking. I don't feel comfortable telling people to bike across the city to work if there's no infrastructure there for them. So our primary goal right now is to try to get better infrastructure, and so far it seems to be working a little bit. Beyond that, we are doing other things to try to get more people out slowly, but I know even the City of Kitchener has pulled back a little bit. Like, they're not running Bike Fest this year, which previously was a sort of bike culture festival, because they're focusing on the infrastructure as well. So it's very much about, like, if you build it, they will come, I think is kind of the mentality right now. So we're working on that, but long-term goals definitely do include a little bit more of then starting to convince people to actually get out and use the infrastructure once it's built, because sometimes you miss it. Like, you might be driving and just not even realize it's there or what it's used for or how you can use it. So we will definitely have plans for even more education in the future.
Well, thank you, and I thank you for your outreach to elected officials and getting everybody out biking and showing people what it really looks like in our municipalities. That was very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Schatz.
Thank you. I'm not sure, but I think I have one question out of this, but I have a few comments too. First of all, reading this report, I was really encouraged with the good results and the various initiatives that have been put in place, from traffic signaling to pedestrian crosswalks and so on. I guess I can offer a couple of examples where I've been either witnessed or been almost involved as a pedestrian, and one was at King and Conestoga in Waterloo. Walking across, and someone was turning right and came up, and I saw them and she saw me, and we both stopped at the same time, but it could have been worse. Another was uptown Waterloo at King and the tracks there. I was watching, and a fellow just stepped off the curb right in front of a car, and within inches of being hit. So first a comment and then a question, I guess. We really need to take some responsibility for our own well-being, whether we're a cyclist or a pedestrian, and not always blame it on the drivers, on the vehicles. And I wonder, I guess one more thing. Have the rules of the road changed for cycling? I used to cycle as a teenager, and when I was taught to cycle, we had police officers come, and we had a little course set up, and we had to drive it, and we learned all the rules of the road. And if you were going straight through and someone was turning right, you pull in behind them. You don't come up to the right and sort of cut in front of them. And so with the lanes, with the new biking lanes and with the multi-use trails, I think there may be some confusion over, I know I'm confused over what the rules are and where the right-of-ways go. So my question would be, what do we do as a region in terms of public education, and what can we do? Because like Councillor Verbanovic said, the most complaints I get are traffic complaints, whether it's in the city or in the townships. It's about traffic and people driving, and so what's our public education program like?
Well, over the years, we've provided a number of pedestrian safety campaigns. We've provided a number of cycling campaigns. This last campaign, the extra sec check, was targeted at everybody, but it had components where it was specifically targeted at drivers to look for pedestrians and cyclists, and it had specific components for the cyclists and pedestrians to be looking out for the drivers. It's a shared responsibility. There's also a responsibility from the provincial level to provide a curriculum that teaches people how to use the road properly and understand the roads. So with that said, there's a number of people providing public education, but we're trying the best possible to get our education out, and safety improvements head through education.
If I may, Mr. Chair, when we started with the roundabouts, we had a very concerted education program on roundabouts. When is the right time to maybe do something like that in terms of cycling that is not just for the cyclists, but also for the drivers, so that everybody understands what the rules are? Is there a plan to do that? Is there a time that's good to do that?
Mr. Vanderkeer?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, well, we're just wrapping up the Safe Roads campaign, and we'll be looking forward to our next safety campaign, which could start up in 2021. So that could definitely be the subject of the project team to have a look at, to see what are the things that we want to focus on for the next campaign. So we'll take that in mind for sure as direction and assistance in providing ideas for that campaign.
Councillor Rentz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am not sure who plans the timing on these meetings, but whoever does, they got it wrong today, that's for sure. Hi, Bob. Good to see you. Thank you for the presentation. I just have a couple of questions for you. One is roundabouts. I mean, I drive our roundabouts on Ira Needles maybe 6, 7, 8 times a day. And so I see a lot of activity there. And the one thing that concerns me, and I'm wondering if we can do something about it, is I really don't think pedestrians know how to cross busy roundabouts. And in my view, I don't think we have signs for pedestrians I mean, not so much for drivers, but more for pedestrians about stop, look, make sure you see the drivers slowing down or stopping before you proceed. And I don't know how you do that. These may be high school kids, they're adults that think they can just kind of take a step off the curb and the whole world's going to stop for them. And have we ever looked at putting up signs for pedestrians, not for motorists, but more for pedestrians when they walk up, signs on both sides about the safe way to, in a brief manner, stop, look, point, that kind of stuff at our very busy roundabouts? Is that part of our educational program?
Yeah, we have run previous education campaigns instructing pedestrians how to use roundabouts. You may have remembered the roundabout dance specifically. There was 2 or 3 education campaigns teaching and singing about how to negotiate a roundabout as a pedestrian.
Sure, I know the jingle.
Yeah.
But that's not a sign. And you know, we put signs up for people to stop. We put signs up for people to yield. We do all of these things. But what do we do for pedestrians at roundabouts? Do we have any kind of signage that says, you know, make sure that you're aware that all the traffic is stopped, or point.
Yeah, to be quite honest, to go back in history, there used to be some signs saying to pedestrians, wait for gap, and then the region advocated for changing the right-of-way to provide pedestrians the right-of-way at roundabouts, which led to the yield to pedestrian signs, and then regional staff advocated the province again to legalize crosswalks at roundabouts through the level 2 pedestrian crossover. So it's now legal for pedestrians to have the right-of-way and be provided the right-of-way at roundabouts through the use of the level 2 PXO. But we have not installed signs instructing how pedestrians should look left for a motorist.
Well, having the right-of-way when you step off the curb doesn't mean much if you get hit or you die, right? So we are going to be putting signs in? Is that what you're saying? Is that part of...
No, I didn't say, I said we don't have signs presently posted at roundabouts instructing pedestrians how to use roundabouts.
Do other municipalities have that?
No.
In Ontario?
No.
Mr. Vanderkeer?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we generally would want to install countermeasures to address a problem. And right now, we are not having a pedestrian collision problem at our roundabouts. There's been the odd collision, but compared to traffic signals, we're not having problems with pedestrian collisions. So we really want to make sure that we're addressing a problem by putting up a new sign. We definitely need to keep adding information to the website and considering it through our future education campaigns. But a sign would be definitely considered if there was a problem. There's anecdotal things going on. I'm sure you've observed them. We've all observed them. But in terms of a collision problem, we're not seeing that currently at our roundabouts.
Okay. So you're saying people should go to our website? You know how many people probably go to our website? Huh? Okay. Well, and I think that's part of the educational program then, whether it's in schools or... I mean, I see a lot of people. I saw a guy got nailed at Herb and iron needles on his disabled motorized scooter. He ended up under the front of a guy's car. So I don't know if these things are not getting reported, but I've seen lots and lots of close calls. And I think our responsibility is to make sure that we don't have problems. And I think you do that by proper signage or whatever. So I think take it under advisement for what it's worth. But I think the other problem that we have, I think ever since Henry Ford was a teenager, we've had a speeding issue in the world. And every municipality considers it's the most important thing, but there's really no solutions. I mean, you know, you drive through a parking lot and people are walking there and they're ticked off because you're going too fast until they get in their cars in the parking lot and drive away. And then they're mad at the pedestrians because they're in the way. So, I mean, I don't know how this ends, but I think we're doing a pretty good job in our communities. Thanks.
Thank you.
Councillor Jowett.
Through the chair, and first of all, I'd like to say thanks to Emily for the report. The advocacy is very important, and certainly it gets to the analysis level with the work of Bob, Thomas, and Stephen. And it's a disciplined science, and I'm trying to learn as much as I can every day. I was alerted to the fact that 3 of the 4, and I know it's a bit ambiguous because I read the staff report and it says staff will assess the countermeasures and report back to regional council. So I might be a little bit ahead of the curve here, but I'd like to be proactive so we don't spend a bunch of time running down the wrong rabbit hole. So I'm concerned that 3 of the 4 are literally on Hespeler Road for the pilot project or informally being discussed for Hespeler Road. And one of them, the potentials for the pilot, and this is the pilot, the no right turn on red, is on University in Albert. So 3 out of the 4 are in Cambridge and on Hespeler Road. I know that when you put Kitchener and Waterloo together, they're a much larger symbiotic urban geographic area. And I know there's been a lot more work done in this area when it comes to cycling, and I believe that there's a lot more pedestrian traffic in the downtown core there, both downtown cores comparatively. So I'm just looking to understand, and when I started to ask myself some questions. When I read through the report and I'm looking at the ranking, we have, for example, we have number 1 is Hespeler Road and Munch, 75% cyclist. And then we have number 3 is Cortland, 80% cyclist challenges. And then, of course, we have number 9, Homer Watson, 75% cyclist. So I'm hoping that the report can reflect or justify a little bit more clearly why we would want to put 3 on one main strip like that. Hespeler Road at its best, non-peak hours, is a bit hard already to get through, let alone, and whether we like it or not, change causes problems. And so a radical change on one major road like that does concern me. I can't predict what the outcomes will be, but I do feel like we're gonna have to answer those questions. So I guess that's where I'd like to go with that question. So who wants to answer it?
Okay, so the reasons why a right turn on red was recommended to be prohibited at Hespeler Road and Munch was because that has been identified as the most problematic location for vehicles turning right and hitting a cyclist, specifically the westbound right turn from Munch onto Hespeler Road. That's been, cyclists, as I mentioned, are gaining speed coming through down the grade, going southbound on that east side of Hespeler Road and being struck quite often in that crosswalk when they're going through. So a right turn red will should have, and we anticipate it should have a really good positive effect. Hespeler Road and Bishop Street was the location where right turn on red is being prohibited. And 75% is identified in here that have been hit by a right turning vehicle. So it was 2 locations. There's 3 locations overall that are being recommended for a right turn on red. 2 are on Hespeler Road.
Right, and so are we suggesting that, like, that's an even bigger issue if we have one road in the region that has 3 of the most potential spots for the necessity to mitigate by way of right turn on red, isn't it? Like, there's a bigger issue here, at least, and I have a lot to learn about transportation. I know it's a discipline that I respect. It just doesn't make sense to me.
It's so Hespeler Road is a busy roadway. It's been problematic at 2 locations for cycling collisions, and this measure, although it might have an inconvenience on motor vehicles turning right and reducing the capacity of that intersection, we're seeing that, in a handful of locations. We have 3,000 intersections in the region. We're considering three locations for no right turn on red, specifically to enhance and prevent people from being hit and injured on a bicycle.
Yeah, I get the big picture, and I know that when I emailed Thomas last week, he did suggest that it could change depending on moving forward. I guess my ask here is that we really give some consideration, because I find it, I want to know if there's a bigger issue here. If like Isherwell is going on to Highway 24, is that the intersection we're discussing here? So that would be 3 on Hespeler Road.
No, Munch and Hespeler Road is one intersection that is adjacent. That's directly across from Isherwood.
Yeah.
The other intersection is Bishop.
Right, and so my point being, Bob, I'm not trying to be belligerent here, but my point being that either there's a bigger issue here or there's more to understand here, or is there some convenience of having a pilot project in an area close together? Is it an ability to monitor? I'm just looking for more information, because I'm already getting questions with regard to, well, why are we getting 3 of the 4? We don't even have the same cycle traffic that Kitchener and Waterloo have, and we don't even have the same urban geographic population and traffic. So I guess I guess I want to know why this was selected, whether you're calling them the most busy intersect. Well, if that's the case, then can we get to those stats and find out what the other issue is?
Well, I'll just reiterate, Hespeler Road at Munch has been the location with the most frequent collisions involving a cyclist being hit by.
And the second one would be the other one, and the third one would be the other one? Is that what you're telling me?
No, it's Hespeler and Munch was ranked number 1. Bishop was, I don't have, well, I have this right in front of me, but it's ranked in the top 10. But when you drill down and look specifically at how collisions are happening at those locations, the countermeasure that best addresses them is a right turn on red prohibition.
Right, okay, and thanks, Stephen, for the report. Again, I can see that Munch is 1, Bishop is 2, and these are all on Hespeler Road. Jaffrey is 4, you know, and then we get to YMCA, I think, is number 9. So I get that road is showing as problematic. I would just like to know more about other rationalizations. I get that you're putting a solution in here, but what is it? Why are those collisions happening? We don't have the same bike traffic, so it doesn't make sense to me.
And like I said, the common theme at Hespeler Road and Munch is cyclists are on that sidewalk riding southbound on the east side of Hespeler Road, catching speed because it's on a grade downhill, and they're flying through the intersection, catching drivers turning right off guard.
We don't have that scenario anywhere else in the region?
We do, but
that level?
we do, but not at that level.
Okay, thank you. So do I have to make a formal request?
No,
Information?
I think staff will get back to you on if there's a bigger issue going on in Hespeler Road. It's a very busy road, obviously. And see if they can identify for you what that bigger issue is, if there is one.
Yeah, and my concern is, if we're gonna change 3 lights on Hespeler Road or 3.
Well, I think there's only 2 being.
Well, Isherwell is, they're fairly close. I'm just saying, if there's 3 on there, is there gonna be a bigger picture?
I think there's only 2, Councillor Jowett. What's the one on Fisher? Is that?
Isherwood and Munch are directly opposite each other. They make up the same intersection.
2 intersections, yeah.
Right, but there's going to be 3 changes, all within a very close area. Is that not the way you're seeing that?
There are only 2 intersections being impacted on Hespeler Road. I think the reality of it is, and we can provide you additional information, but essentially, these are the locations where we are having problems with people making right turns on red and hitting pedestrians. I mean, that in a nutshell is what is happening at those locations. That's why we're picking these for countermeasures. I mean, if you're looking at bigger issues, yes, cyclists are riding on the sidewalk where they probably shouldn't be. But the solution to this is we have difficulty getting the cyclists off the sidewalks. If we put in the no right turn on red, we will prevent that collision as long as people don't make that right turn. So that's why we're looking at these as a pilot. And the conditions, as Mr. Henderson mentioned, in this case, people are approaching that intersection with a bit more speed. There may be similar ones in the rest of the region, but we're just not seeing the same problem at those as we are here. But we can provide you with the details of that. We can go through each of these intersections and let you see the details of those collisions and why we think this countermeasure will work. But that in a nutshell is we're seeing that problem at those 3 intersections. That's why we're proposing the countermeasure, and we think it'll work.
Okay, and just out of respect, Thomas, I will tell you, I heard this through the grapevine, and it came through the press, and that's why I sent you the email to confirm. I think we have to be able to speak transparently, open, and get this information to the average driver, certainly, because they're asking the questions. Maybe they don't know the data that we have here, but I think it needs to happen. And Stephen, can I borrow that report again?
On a larger, I mean, if you're looking at a larger issue, the larger issue is many drivers don't seem to understand or believe that a right turn on red actually is, it is a red light. You are required to stop. You are then required to look both ways and proceed when it's safe to proceed. many drivers seem to believe that the right turn on red is permissive in that you don't have to stop. You just roll through that intersection. And I would say that is a common problem at all intersections and can result in collisions. So if you're looking at a larger issue, it's probably to some extent driver education, and I would suggest that's not just a region of Waterloo problem. I would suggest that's throughout Ontario an issue, that drivers do not recognize that the red light still means stop. After you've stopped, you have the ability to make a right turn, assuming it's clear for you to do that. It is not just roll through. In fact, I think most of our red light charges, camera charges, are made on people not stopping to make a right turn.
Okay, much appreciated. I just think there's something else at play that we might be missing here, because it's odd to me. Yeah. Okay, thanks, Stephen. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Chair Galloway. I really appreciate this report, Bob, and I would have to tell you that I think the questions that you're getting are really an indication of a seismic shift that's happening for cyclists, pedestrians, and drivers in Waterloo region, and you've been on top of monitoring that for a really long time. And the reason that I would step back from embracing Vision Zero is because this whole report is peppered with pilot projects. And I'm a real fan of pilot projects because it provides evidence-based decision-making. So sort of continuing on from Councillor Jowett's questions, mine really is, how are we monitoring these pilots? What criterion are we using to say this is a success aside from the collision reports?
Yeah, we will, staff will assess the collisions before and after the interventions are put in place. They'll account for traffic volume changes over time and control the study effectively so that we know whether the intervention actually scientifically worked or if it was just a phenomenon. So there's science behind the assessments that are done so that we can go forward on a more knowledgeable basis, understanding how the countermeasures actually worked.
And I know that we have invested as a council in a region in MyoVision, and I know that technology looks at pedestrians, cyclists, as well as cars. Are these the kind of pilot projects where we would institute that technology in order to have a fuller assessment and not just be collisions but near misses and not just anecdotal evidence?
Yes, for sure. There'll be some metrics and some technology built into the MyoVision system that will help us better analyze and understand how countermeasures are working as well. What I see as being the more important piece is having the ability to count pedestrians at signalized intersections much more effectively than we do today using the MyoVision system, which really helps you understand changes over time and the influence that exposure and the number of pedestrians and volume of cyclists can have on your study.
I didn't see specifically addressed, when it says a pilot, are we assuming that's 1 year, 2 years? How long will these pilot projects be? Or does it depend on what change we're implementing?
It depends. The time is certainly an important piece, and the number of collisions is also the other important piece. You can put that information together to determine whether the results are statistically significant or not. But generally, we like to evaluate over a 2-year period before and after.
And I have just one final question, and I too appreciated Emily's intervention about active transportation, and I know it's something that the region and local municipalities are really leaning into. I also know that when I talk to cyclists and active transportation, that there really is a difference between an urban setting and a rural setting. And I'm going back to the interventions we heard earlier from the community about St. Agatha and changing that intersection, and I'm just wondering, do we have a different approach when we're looking at agriculturally zoned properties versus settlement areas and urban areas?
Are you specifically, just so I understand the question right, are you specifically asking, do we have different design standards for intersections, yes, urban and rural? Right. Yes, generally we'll use smaller radius corners in urban intersections versus rural intersections. They tend to be more forgiving to allow larger vehicles to traverse those intersections. But with every geometric factor, there's always an influence on collisions, which you have to respect as well.
And just one final question. I think it's Councillor Shantz that brought up the difference between trails versus bike lanes. Do we approach those differently in an urban setting versus a rural setting?
For sure, yeah. Trails are generally more conducive to a rural setting. In urban settings, we have to look at multi-use trails very carefully to ensure that we don't end up having to look for exiting vehicle signs out because of a collision history involving cyclists being hit on those trails because of a lot of accesses. But yes, we look at the context of the environment for sure.
Thank you.
Councillor Kiefer.
Thank you, Chair Galloway. It's not on, is it? Is it on? Oh, thank you. Thank you, Bob, for the report. Like Councillor Jowett, I'm concerned about many of the things that she brought up. I am concerned, too, about the Hespeler Road, Munch Avenue situation. And I understand, pilot project, you're going to find out things and bring back recommendations. I travel that all the time. I have yet to come across a cyclist that may be just coincidental, but that I'm surprised to see that particular situation there. And like Councillor Jowett, I've been contacted by some residents that feel that they do not want to see this eliminated. And one of the things they brought up was from an environmental standpoint, if the cars are standing there idling, that could cause some issues too, and backup of traffic. My particular feeling is that maybe there's other ways, as you've outlined in your report, that can be handled, these things can be handled without maybe utilizing a no turn on red. So I'm not sure of that, but I'm looking forward to the information that that Councillor Jowett has asked for, and to come back with that. And I think we have to be very careful here of what we're doing. Hespeler Road is a busy road. I travel it every day. And yes, there are accidents, and yes, there are problems, but there may be other ways. I like the idea of signs and lights and lines on the road for sure. I think they create safety. But as was pointed out by some of my colleagues, sometimes I think drivers, in particular car drivers and cyclists and pedestrians need to look in the mirror to see what they're doing. But thanks for that.
Councillor Armstrong.
First, the pilot projects for the photo enforcement that are supposed to be going, people in New Dundee in front of the school were informed that that's going to be a pilot project, and they're just wondering when that's going to occur, because they're asking quite frequently because they are impatient.
Well, we'll be coming back with a report in the next cycle or two, identifying the program. I anticipate the specific locations being recommended in a follow-up report after automated speed enforcement at a higher level is authorized by the region.
Right. And as far as cyclists getting hit on the right turn on the red light, I'm trying to figure out how that occurs. Because if are the cyclists coming from the right into the crosswalk?
Yeah, so if I'll try to explain. It would be really good if I had a visual of the intersection, but I'll explain it. So picture a green light on Hespeler Road. So motor vehicle traffic has the right of way on Hespeler Road. Vehicles are stopped on Munch. Yeah. When the cyclists are driving southbound along Hespeler Road on the east side crosswalk, or on the east side sidewalk driving southbound, they have a green light. They're picking up speed because that's a grade going downhill. They're not stopping, they're proceeding straight through that intersection through the crosswalk with speed. The vehicles making a westbound right turn to go northbound on Hespeler Road are looking left for a gap in traffic because they're waiting at a red light. But as Mr. Schmidt alluded to, they have an obligation to make sure traffic is safe on the left and right, but typically when you're turning right, I find myself even having to consciously look both ways, but they're looking for a gap in traffic. They find it, they make the turn, and lo and behold, there's a cyclist riding through the crosswalk with speed. And that's primarily how right turning collisions involving cyclists occur. And we're seeing it occur more often at intersections that have grades. And Hespeler Road at Munches, that type of location.
My observations are that when I was learning to ride my bicycle a couple of years ago, I was taught that in crosswalks, you walk. You don't ride on crosswalks at intersections, that you get off the bike and walk it. If that is not being taught, then I think there's a grave error, and I think the cyclists need to go back and revisit what is proper cycling. So I think that's one of the problems. And I do have a solution for a lot of the accidents that occur. I think that the region should infuse into the water system some kind of drug that creates patience. Because I think if we can do that, I think that's going to reduce a lot. Eh? No, we won't make it an opioid. Thank you.
Councillor Shantz?
Thank you, and thank you for that question, because it's basically where my comment was going, and I'm glad you've got that picture up there. So if I'm a driver and I'm coming up to that intersection heading west on Munch, I'm looking to the right for pedestrians, I'm looking to the left for traffic, because I'm turning right into traffic heading north. When I pull out and there's a cyclist coming in the wrong direction on the sidewalk, that just isn't what you're looking for. So are we telling drivers that we have to expect cyclists to be coming any direction, at any speed, at any time? Or are we telling cyclists, you're supposed to be riding on the right-hand side of the road, or as Councillor Armstrong said, when you come to a crosswalk, it's the cyclist's responsibility to make sure they are safe before they come whipping through the intersection. And with respect to Emily, I believe in cycling. I think cycling is a good thing, but I think we really have to get the rules straight for everyone, and I think we need expectation that people are following the rules.
So,
Mr. Smith wants to comment.
I think we would love if everyone, cyclists, pedestrians, vehicles, all followed the rules. That would, I think, be great. But I think the reality is there are sometimes misunderstandings of exactly what the rules are, how to deal with that. And in this particular case, with the no right turn on red, we see these accidents, these collisions happening. And we're looking at it from the perspective of how do we prevent them? Regardless of who is in the right and who is in the wrong, how do we prevent them? And we see by removing that right to make that right turn, we remove that conflict and we prevent that collision, and hopefully someone doesn't get hurt. So our pilot program is to look at that and see, is that a solution? Will that prevent these types of collisions? But yes, if we simply go on a rules-based approach, correct, the cyclists should not be riding in that crosswalk, but the reality is they are, and I think the reality is there will be more of them riding in those crosswalks, and I think many of the advocates with cross rides and things like that are actually suggesting we move in the direction of providing the right-of-way for cyclists in those types of situations. So we're trying to solve the problem of the collision rather than trying to point blame at any one individual or party.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't do the pilot or that no right turn on red isn't a good solution there, but I'm saying in a way we're putting the blame on someone who's actually following the rules, and not addressing the problem, which is, I think, twofold. One is identifying exactly what are the rules on sidewalks, and number two, maybe if we're going to say that cycling on the sidewalk is fine, we need a sign for the cyclist saying, "Stop." Walk across, or, if it's the cyclist that is not following the rules. That's what I'm saying. I don't disagree with this pilot. I think saving lives and saving accidents is a very good thing. But I think if we're going to look at the root of the problem is how cyclists are riding and how our expectation as a driver is in terms of keeping everybody safe.
Councillor McGarry.
Thank you very much for the report. And I think the primary purpose for any road safety program is to reduce the collisions between any type of vehicles or active transportation users, and to reduce the healthcare costs and the healthcare burden that happens because of the collisions. I have a couple of comments and a quick question. Currently, there's technology being developed that's an autonomous light system that would be accessible to use at an intersection to alert drivers approaching into intersection of an upcoming fast-moving cyclist, either in a cycling lane or on a sidewalk. And that's being developed right now and tested in a test facility in Ottawa. And those types of movable solutions may assist in alerting the driver that although they have checked the intersection and feel it's safe to proceed, while they're looking in the other direction, that cyclist moving at huge speed may actually approach the intersection much more quickly. So these solutions are actually being worked on as we speak. Secondly, I agree that public education is key on all fronts, and it's not really going to be until we move to fully autonomous vehicles, I think, that will reduce the 93% of collisions that are actually caused by human error. Thirdly, the issue with the collisions on Hespeler Road means that we really need cycling facilities and safe and separated cycling lanes on Hespeler Road once it's redone. Is there any timeline or any thought to the future about when cycling facilities that would protect the drivers and protect the cyclists coming in Hespeler Road?
Yeah, I know there's a plan for cycling facilities to be considered. I'm not quite sure. Maybe Mr. Bauer knows the timeline for that.
Mr. Vanderkeer?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The cross-section of Hespeler Road would likely change significantly in the event that, ION Phase 2 was implemented. And I think that proposed cross-section, includes, if memory serves, multi-use trails on either side. That doesn't necessarily remove the risk with cyclists riding through intersections, but it provides an opportunity at least to provide a better facility for cyclists, a dedicated facility, and also provides an opportunity to probably offset those crossings back of the intersection, which might help to mitigate some of those types of collisions. So, if and when that goes, there will be some big changes to the cross-section on Hespeler Road, which could help.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Foxton.
Thank you. I'll attempt to be brief. I'm aware of this intersection very well. All 4 roads are downhill to that intersection. If I'm driving and I'm making a right turn and I check to my left and I check to my right, that biker can still be there but farther back because he's traveling at such speeds that even though I see it's clear and start to pull out, he's coming. So that's another issue, is the construction of that roadway in all 4 areas are steep hills. You don't need to pedal. You're going to be booming down there.
Okay, I have no further speakers, but I have some questions as well. And I want to thank you, Bob and staff, for a really comprehensive report and for our road safety program, which, as you say, is really looked to as a gold standard. But we still have accidents and we still have improvements to make as much as possible. So the first thing I want to address is the right turn pilot. So we have no right turns on reds at many intersections now in the municipality.
Correct.
So what's the difference between those that are currently no rights on reds? In fact, in the report, you're recommending another one to be regularized at King and Victoria without any pilot. So why are we doing pilots as opposed to just simply saying no right turn on reds?
Yeah. So the difference between most existing right turn on reds that are in the system now were implemented over a longer period of time, but most of them, if not the majority of them, were installed because of sightline limitations. So drivers turning left couldn't see motorists with enough visibility to make a right turn safely. So the right turns were prohibited in those situations. The difference between the existing network of no right turn on reds is they were motor vehicle centric to address motor vehicle safety. This pilot is more or less meant to address and mitigate vehicles hitting cyclists and pedestrians. That's the primary difference.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm curious though as to, does it have to do with the traffic manual not necessarily allowing them or not meeting maybe the warrants in the traffic manual where the other ones that we do, like King and Victoria, we're not doing a pilot there, we're just going to do it.
Yeah.
Are there warrants for this in the traffic manual that don't exist at these other intersections where we're trying to solve cycling accidents?
Yeah, there is no general warrants for right turn on red prohibitions. The majority that are out there now were based on limited sight lines not meeting engineering standards, so that's why they were put in. This is more engineering gut feel. We feel that the measures being taken specifically will target and reduce the number of pedestrians and cyclists being hit because of how we understand intersections and how they operate and driver behavior. All that good stuff is leading to these recommendations.
So where does the Highway Traffic Act intersect with the no right on reds issue? I mean, there are jurisdictions in Canada where there are no right turn on reds.
Yeah,
there's jurisdictions elsewhere in the world where there are no right turn on reds anywhere. So is that a Highway Traffic Act thing?
It's a Provincial Highway Traffic Act for those provinces like Quebec that have a provincial legislation for no right turns on red. But that's where it really relies to. We can install a no right turn on red on an individual basis using our bylaw mechanisms in place through the region, but we don't have an ability to, without provincial legislation, to ban right turns on red across the city. If we were to ban right turns on red across the city, we would require the bylawing of every single approach to a signalized intersection and putting up signs.
So to what extent will the pilot teach us anything in terms of, like I understand the bike lane pilot, we're going to understand, what winter maintenance is going to look like, and we're going to understand how the traffic is impacted and how the cycling is impacted. I'm less sure about what we're going to learn about this pilot.
Yeah. What we're going to learn about this pilot is the efficacy of this measure to reduce cycling and pedestrian-related collisions. We'll also get a better feeling on how drivers will behave and comply with this restriction. It's not the first time we've prohibited rights on red for a cycling-related collision problem. In other areas where we've done it, we've seen some good results. I believe it was through a previous annual countermeasures report, we installed a no right turn on red on King Street in Kitchener at, I forget the intersection, near Scott Street and near the farmers market. And it's proved beneficial.
The next question I had is, do you see the implementation of cross rides as a countermeasure at certain intersections?
To be quite frank and honest, I see cross rides as being a measure that will enhance mobility for cyclists. It won't be a safety measure. In fact, it's.
So that's why it's not in this report. But we are considering cross rides at certain intersections, but it's not seen as a countermeasure.
Correct. It's not seen as a countermeasure. It's seen as a measure to legalize the ability to ride through a crosswalk.
Right. Well, and that's where it intersected with what Councillor Shantz was saying, where people technically should be dismounting. Cyclists technically should be dismounting and walking through. But if there's a cross ride, you then are allowed to proceed on your bike.
That is correct. It legalizes the riding through.
But you're not seeing that as a countermeasure.
Yeah.
And the other question I had was scramble intersections. Is that seen as a countermeasure, or is that not a countermeasure to prevent vehicular, pedestrian accidents?
It's the jury's out in the industry on the effectiveness of scrambles. They can have other impacts on collisions. We've seen incidents in Toronto where they've instituted pedestrian scrambles where the number of collisions involving pedestrians went up afterwards. To offset that negative effect of the scramble that was introduced, Toronto opted to ban all turns left and right through those intersections that saw increases in pedestrian collisions. The one issue was pedestrians were relegated to only the pedestrian scramble phase to cross, and then they were held back during all other vehicle movement phases, which pedestrians weren't, in those instances, willing to wait that long. And so they started going through the intersections in non-compliance with the pedestrian signals, getting hit by vehicles. So every action has a reaction, and those type of reactions occurred in Toronto.
Okay. I've got no other comments. That report is just for information. So, but always a popular one. So, and it evokes a lot of discussion and some emotion as well. So, thanks very much, Bob, for the,
Thank you.
and thanks, Emily, as well, for sticking. Okay, so now we can go to the consent agenda. Councillor Jowett.
No, that's it.
Okay. Okay, anyone want anything else on the consent agenda? There are only a couple items there. We've dealt with one of them. Moved by Councillor Foxton, seconded by Councillor Nowak. This is now to approve the consent agenda. All in favor? That's carried. The regular agenda, the first item to deal with is page 64. This is the multi-use trail, Bruce Street to Centennial Road, starting on page 64. When we're
supposed to break at 10:15. We're supposed to have lunch at 12. It's almost 12 now. We haven't even started here. Do you have a plan for the rest of the day?
I don't think a plan has been discussed, but I think we only have about 15 minutes left. Well, I don't know. I mean, well, if that's what council wishes to do, sure. Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break, which I know will not be 5 minutes.
I like that idea.
Yeah.
That or.
I'm going to track down Chris and just see what.
It's a public health issue.
Community chair sort out.
That's right.
That's a good. I don't think so. I think probably.
I don't think we need much more.
No, I think probably try to blast through it. There's Chris.
We'll share that with public health and see if they can figure it out. Yeah.
What time did you go to?
I see the people are and
Hey, how are you?
How are you, sir?
No, I moved my other one because I haven't got thrown in. So I can't.
No, not at all. Oh, yes. Ryan Pettifer. He's the director of housing, so it may be him plus or minus the team, yeah. Yeah. We have their vision. Do you mean the beach region's property that? Oh, okay, sorry. Oh, okay. So they're looking at expanding. That's good.
Okay, I want to reconvene planning and works, please.
Well, Ryan and Jeff.
Better you than me, buddy.
He's, so I don't expect you to. Jeff is the day's planner.
Yeah, I see right check. That's the right answer. That there was a mistake. Yeah, there's some, not into blaming anyone, it's just there's, so we'll confirm it and maybe before the end of the meeting.
We just go like right now.
Just confirm it.
Okay. I'll mention it to you on the 23rd. Mr. Matthews.
You wouldn't mind just.
Okay, if everybody could take their seats, please. We are behind schedule. Not sure why we needed a break. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is the Victoria Street multi-use trails. Moved by Councillor Clark, seconded by Councillor Jowett. All in favor? Carried. What's been suggested is that we finish the P&W, we start CS, and hear at least the delegation and that particular issue, and then potentially break for lunch and for closed session, and then finance subsequently, or finishing CS and. But Chris is confirming that with the chairs as we speak.
That's all good.
Well, not up to me. Okay, the next item is the King Victoria Transit Hub public consultation that is to announce formally the date of the public consultation. Any questions in that regard? Seeing none, the next is the federal contribution agreement extension request. There is a motion for a committee to consider to request that extension of the funding. See no questions, someone want to move that? Councillor Foxton, Councillor Jaworski, all in favor? That's carried. The next item is a change of scope or an expanded scope for the Cambridge Transit Supportive Strategy on page 106. Again, just for questions, if any, to make an amendment or a change to the scope of that strategy. The recommendation, Councillor Kiefer, you gonna move it? Sure. Okay, Councillor Jowett, second. All in favor? That's carried. There is an error in the Roseville Road PIC that should read January 23rd. That is the date in the report. It's incorrect on the list of upcoming public events. Councillor Foxton. Okay. Any other matters to bring to the meeting? Councillor Jowett, you look like you missed something.
No, I just, I wanted to ask about 6.2. Are we there yet, Tom? Because I'm honestly just, all I can think about
We
is
did deal with
food
it,
and
but
going to the bathroom.
we dealt with it, but go ahead.
So, given the recent announcement of our CAO, I feel like this item might need a little bit more scrutiny. So when the recommendation states, I mean, the first half is not a problem, but then the regional chair and regional clerk, so are we now taking that away from our CAO and giving it to our chair, is what I'm asking. Do you remember when, was that not something?
I'm not sure that's relevant, but.
Yeah, I can totally comment on this.
Thank you, Mike.
The regional chair and regional clerk execute almost all contracts and documents corporately on behalf of the region. There's very, very few documents that I execute. So this is basically just kind of confirming the status quo.
Right. Okay.
It's asking for an extension of time on that federal contribution agreement, and the regional chair and clerk would have signed the original agreement. And so this is basically just authorizing them, as always, to execute corporate documents on behalf of the region. And I see Deborah nodding, so that's always a good sign for me.
Yeah, so it's just a continuation. I just wondered why it's brought forward, because I thought maybe it was making a change to current policy. Okay, thank you.
Motion to adjourn. Councillor Kiefer, Councillor Urbanovic, all in favor? Carried.
Did you love it?
Yeah.
When in doubt, cause confusion. How are you, John? Good.
Can I follow you? Yeah. Yeah.
No, I don't. I enjoy what I do. I have a year of a chair, that's really helpful. Steve, can I talk to you for a second? Absolutely.
Thanks for everybody's patience. We've changed up the order a bit, as you heard. We're going to start, we're going to bypass admin and finance, come back to it, and do community services now, because we do have a delegation to hear. And first, I will ask for any declarations of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. All right, seeing none, we are into our delegations, and I'm told Marianne is here. Welcome, Marianne. I think we heard you about a year ago on this issue.
Sorry?
I think we heard you about a year ago on this issue.
Yes, I was.
And I hear that the item that I prepared for your consideration is on page 4 of your agenda. I submitted something for your consideration. I haven't contacted any staff or politicians on this issue, but I wanted to come back and give you an update of what had happened to me a year ago. Exactly 1 year ago today, I was at the Landlord and Tenant Board. I had received 2 N5s, notice to evict, based on uncleanliness. There had been what they call fire brats and book lice found in my apartment, none of which are included on any pest control sites, or if you look at Able Pest Control, they will say those aren't technically pests. Book lice, I had a lot of books, and fire brats are similar to silverfish. But what I did have was bed bugs, and I had paid somebody to come out and document that I had bed bugs, and had them probably since October. So this is January the 14th, and I had had bed bugs since that time. I do admit that I have a lot of treasures, I have a lot of books, I have a lot of clothing. So it is difficult to treat for bed bugs, but I'd been treated 2 years previous with 10 other apartment units. On that day, I received some legal advice from Community Legal Services at the corner of Frederick and I think it's Bruce, but they can only give you summary advice. So I had received a couple of telephone calls to help me with my presentation. The property management company had the pest control agent and a paralegal. I had 20 pages of emails, documentation, and other emails saying that we had continually talked about the fact that I had bed bugs and was not being treated. I attended last year's council meeting. It was the end of January, and at that point we had agreed to consent for an order issued by the Landlord-Tenant Board that I was to empty out basically all the contents of my apartment in order for the bed bug contractor to spray. And I also had to have 2 feet around the whole perimeter of my apartment, which means that, in effect, there's 4 feet on either side. I was living in very tight quarters, continually being bit, having trouble sleeping, and my mental state was, I would say, troubled. But I came here because I had the feeling that no matter what I did, I would not satisfy either the contractor or the property management company. At that time, I had been living in that apartment, and it says in the documentation, since 2006. I started renting at $650. It was an affordable accommodation, and with rent control, I was paying $750. That unit is currently being rented for $1,350. I was officially evicted, and the locks were changed April 1st. I think the people around this table know that I didn't give up the fight willingly. I fought right till the end. I used every opportunity given to me, and I went weekly to the courthouse to find out when the locks were actually going to be changed. At that point, there was 4 other people either slated for eviction or in the process of being evicted. Two or three left willingly. I have said for your consideration that it was not an equal process, it was not an equal, just place to get, I don't know how, I needed paralegal advice, and it was not available to me because I made $4,000 too much. I would suggest for your consideration that with the affordable housing issues, the private sector will continue to hemorrhage and will have evictions because the Landlord-Tenant Board and the tenants there who attend there cannot afford to represent themselves. and they need paralegal advice. And I'm here today to suggest for your consideration that any affordable housing strategy also has to include additional funds to up the limit so that people who are not financially destitute but are in that medium range to be able to afford paralegal assistance. When I actually had the ability to look for paralegals, the retainer is about $500. They charge about $200 an hour, which isn't outrageous. And what would have been well worth the cost if it would have had a good result. But in looking for paralegals, they said they generally don't represent tenants, that they can't afford to pay for the services. So I was evicted, and I don't think anything I could have done would have avoided the eviction. After attending this here the end of January last year, I did receive some really helpful advice from some of your staff. And there is a company called Empower Cleaning that does help with people who are facing eviction due to bed bugs. But having said that, I don't believe that if I would have avoided that eviction, that it wouldn't have been just facing another one this year. So that's why I'm here today. I wanted to follow up. It's been a year. And to suggest for this council's consideration that if the private sector, which is in a lot of pressure to make money, if you look at the difference, I mean, rent control is rent control. But if my apartment that was once rented for $750 is now being rented for twice the amount, that there's going to be a lot of pressure to evict. And that's all and the only other thing I'd like to say is that, were you aware that Grand River Transit stopped Christmas Day at 7 o'clock? I was visiting grandchildren and grandbabies, had to take a cab home. So I would like for your consideration next year that maybe you let on Christmas Day that give me till 10 o'clock to get home. That's it. Is there any questions? Thank you. Thank you for hearing me again today on the same issue.
I don't see any questions, Marianne. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just have one question. You said that you spoke to staff. Was that? Did you speak to the people who work in the eviction prevention?
It was from community housing, and they were kind enough just to talk to me about the process that I was going through.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah, and they were aware of Empower Cleaning, which actually does help people, but I didn't get in contact with her until well after the eviction notice was underway. So thank you.
We do fund some eviction prevention initiatives, and I'm sure staff will take your suggestion into consideration. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, we're on to requests to move items from the consent agenda. Are there any? Seeing none, would somebody like to move the agenda items? Councillor Fox and Councillor Harris, all in favor? On to the regular agenda. The first item is community safety and well-being legislation, and Mr. Murray is going to introduce this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to make a few really brief introductory comments, and I'll try to keep them really brief in the interest of time. As we outlined in the report, the region has a new legislative responsibility imposed on us by the province for the region to create a community safety and well-being plan and to have that done by the end of 2020. So there's been lots of discussions over the last year about the work that's needed to do that. One of the first steps in moving forward with that is appointing an advisory committee to provide advice and input to the development of the plan. The legislation is a bit prescriptive about the membership of the advisory committee and a bit prescriptive about the roles and tasks of the advisory committee. Staff have looked at this, and recognizing this is a time-limited role, it's basically going to work over the next 12 months, probably 4 meetings over the next 12 months. Our goal is to try to do this in the most efficient and effective way possible. And to try to do that efficiently and effectively, our view was to try to find an existing group or table whose mandate sort of matched this and whose membership largely reflected the required membership that the province is imposing. And so based on that, we've identified the systems change champion table of Wellbeing Waterloo Region as being well suited to play this role. The memberships set out on the very last page of the report. So that's really the focus of this report, is council endorsing that. There's still lots of work to be done to sort out the work plan, how we get this work done efficiently and effectively, how the work gets done between region staff, Wellbeing Waterloo Region, Crime Prevention Council, and Waterloo Region Police, I think, are the key players. So there's lots of discussion going on between Laurie Fiozzi, Chris Sadler, Mark Glode from the police, and others about how to organize the work, roles and responsibilities to make sure this gets done efficiently and effectively. So we'll bring back a subsequent report, likely in March, just providing an update about the work plan, where we're at, what the next steps are. But in the interest of getting on with this, it's important that council takes a step of appointing the advisory committee. So if there's questions about the report, the recommended advisory committee, I or Laurie would be happy to try to answer them. Thank you.
And there are a couple of questions, starting with Councillor McGarry.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, it's more of a comment than anything else. As Waterloo Region Council rep on the Waterloo Region Crime Prevention Council, I am part of the design team that is working alongside Wellbeing Waterloo Region as well as Crime Prevention Council in looking at visioning further. This is something we discussed at our most recent design team meeting as of last week. So I think I'm happy with this direction, but just wanted council to note that I certainly am on the ground with some of the discussions around community and well-being.
Councillor Urbanovich.
Thank you, and I agree with Mr. Murray's assessment that this group certainly seems like a good group. I'm just wondering, though, because this is a more comprehensive plan, I'm wondering, like right now we've got the region represented on it, as well as the CAOs of Woolwich and Kitchener. I'm wondering if, could we use this existing group and extend the invite to the other 5 lower tier municipalities and have them included as part of it as well if they chose to participate? Because this is a permanent, broad scale plan. I think would be good to include the others if they're interested.
Yeah, so we did talk a little bit about that. So I would say a couple things. We're trying, I've used the word efficient and effective. Like, we're trying to find a balance between, being engaging and getting on with that in an efficient way. The bigger the group gets, the just more challenging it is to, convene meetings and have everybody have airtime. In addition to this advisory group, there will be lots of other opportunities for input and engagement. And there have been already, input to Wellbeing Waterloo Region work, input to Crime Prevention Council work. So, and actually, I had discussions with all of the 3 city CAOs, and they were fine with the CAO from Kitchener representing them, and the Township CAOs were equally fine with David Brenneman representing them. So I think we've got a reasonable balance, but be assured there'll be lots of opportunity for all of the area municipalities and all kinds of other community partners and stakeholders to provide input to the process.
Okay, because I think that's really important. Like I think we can't get to a point where we basically have a draft document and then sort of expect people to buy into it. They need to be brought along as part of the process.
I see no other questions. Just to comment that although, here we are with the Wellbeing Waterloo Region and with the Crime Prevention Council, and I think that it's just another example of how we are ahead of the rest of the province and things that complicate stuff a little bit for us, but I think there's benefits to us as well. Do I have a mover for the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Harris, seconded by Councillor McGarry. All in favor? That's approved. Next item, 5.2, the Region of Waterloo's response to the provincial modernization of public health, and I believe Mrs. Schorb is going to speak to that.
Good afternoon, Chair Clark and members of Community Services Committee. In April of last year, as part of the provincial government's budget announcements, the Ministry of Health and the province made announcements that would significantly change both the funding and structure of Ontario's public health system. Following widespread concerns and feedback from health units, municipalities, and also various stakeholder organizations, the government announced a pause in the changes to funding models and launched a renewed consultation process with municipalities, boards of health, and other partners within the public health sector. Consultations were launched last November and consist of an online survey, acceptance of written submissions, as well as in-person sessions that will happen across the province. The consultations have been characterized by the province as a reset on the discussions with no predetermined outcomes. This report before you today is the proposed response by the Region of Waterloo to the discussion paper, Public Health Modernization. The consultation paper identifies 4 key challenges that the province is attempting to address in their transformation. The challenges include insufficient capacity, misalignment of health, social, and other services, duplication of effort, and inconsistent priority setting. In today's report, there are 2 key themes or takeaways. First, that the strengths and challenges in the public health sector do not exist homogeneously across the province's 34 health units, and as a result, a one-size-fits-all approach is not appropriate. And also, Region of Waterloo Public Health, with a population of over 500,000 and a history of effective and efficient performance, is one of the province's strong and sustainable health units with a size that allows it to have a critical mass on its own. Regarding the stated challenges, we are in agreement that there are opportunities that all health units would benefit from, including reducing duplication of effort and improving consistency of priority setting. However, it is our belief that with respect to Region of Waterloo Public Health, both capacity and alignment with health, social, and other services is actually a strength within our current model. Consistent with previous reports to Committee and Council, today's report indicates that the province should reconsider any plans for implementation of a one-size-fits-all approach to governance and structure for public health units in Ontario. That priorities should be established and changes should be implemented in health units or areas of the province where there are identified concerns. Where issues do not exist, Region of Waterloo does not believe that changes to governance and structure are necessary or helpful. And finally, our current fully municipally integrated model serves the community and its residents well in Waterloo Region. The report includes 5 recommendations for committee's consideration. And with that said, we would be pleased to answer any questions at this time.
Thank you. Chair Redmond.
I would be really happy to move the recommendations when appropriate and just compliment Anne and Shuli on a really well-crafted report.
Councillor McGarry.
Thank you. I also wanted to commend the folks that wrote the report for a very thorough report, and I think very balanced and very needed. I think that the opportunities that exist for the province in order to align the work of the province moving forward and the public health departments in whatever way, shape, or form they turn out is important with some of the research and some of that component. I'm very happy to support this report wholeheartedly. My only question is, do you know where some of the other larger public health organizations are going? Are they, have you been in contact? Are they writing reports in this way, or are we going to be a standalone?
For the large health units in the province, including other health units that are fully integrated into regional governments, I would say that we're fairly consistent with them in that they are also advocating not to make changes where things are working well.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and if I could just add to Dr. Wong's comments, yeah, I've talked to my colleagues, particularly in the regional municipalities, the regional CAOs, and I would say, perhaps with one exception, all of the regional municipalities are taking exactly the same view, saying this fully integrated approach to public health within a regional municipality is working well and should continue. So it's a very common, consistent message to the province.
Councillor Galloway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank staff. A very comprehensive report. And I don't want to go into the merits issue. I and others have spoken on the merits before. I was the meeting on January 31st is related to this, correct? So is there a is that correct?
Yes.
So is there a strategy that as many of us as possible should attend? Is there a strategy that we want to employ in terms of impressing upon the panel or whoever's coming? Do we have much opportunity for input? I've put it in my calendar. I think it's important. Is there a strategy that we need to discuss or not discuss publicly or whatever?
I don't believe we know the agenda.
No, it's the ministry that's driving the process, so we don't know what the agenda will look like yet.
Except there was one in Peel that we're likely to follow that model, I suspect, although maybe not.
That's right. Other health units have either made some opening remarks or a presentation, and staff are discussing this now, but we think it would be helpful to have a presentation. Seems like they're going to allow that, and so for us it would be a good opportunity, I think, to pass some key messages up front at the beginning of the session. So that's what we would plan to do. My understanding is that afterwards, the special advisor, Jim Pine, the assistant deputy minister, Alison Blair, et cetera, they would then start asking questions of the municipal representatives and the senior staff. And then it would...
Maybe staff can provide some advice between now and then.
Yeah, no, I think, it's a really, really good question. I don't think we have a good answer for it at this point because we're not sure what the format of the day will look like. So what I would suggest is once we get a sense of the format of the day, then, to your point, Councillor Galloway, we need a strategy. How do we best engage with Jim Pine and Alison Blair over the course of the day? What's the right, best role for councillors, for senior staff to play? And how do we coordinate that potentially with other municipalities who might be there? So we will get back to council for sure. The other opportunity that does exist is, and we'll bake this into the strategy too, there is opportunity for online input, I believe. So that's available broadly to anybody. So we'll work on that and we'll let council know.
What might be particularly helpful, because it's a day, whether or not there's a time more specific that would be helpful, if in fact we would even know that. Thank you.
Chair Redmond.
Just to underscore Councillor Galloway's concerns, this is a very lively topic for the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. I know last summer some of us delegated and met with Minister Elliott to bring this up amongst some other issues, and I think the fact that Jim Pine was appointed as a special advisor is an encouraging opening that they may be listening to us, and the fact that as Dr. Wong said, one size doesn't fit all, and I would agree that the reflection of most integrated public health networks into regional councils very much are consistent with the message that we're putting forward. So there are a whole bunch of fronts that we're working on, but your point about showing strength at the delegated session here is a good one.
Councillor Paxton.
Thank you. Councillor Galloway, again, you brought up some really good points. And Mike, you talked about the public can respond online. We need to get that information out, because if we don't, it will be something that people's ignored because it hasn't been highlighted to them. So if we can have some information about that online thing, maybe an attachment, and have all of our municipalities Facebook and tweet it out and make it really well known, so we get public response to this.
I look forward to the speaking notes that staff will provide, however those look. But I think we're pretty clear. I think the message throughout the report was pretty clear that we understand the need to bring up low-performing public health units to a certain minimum standard, but there's no benefit in bringing down the higher-performing ones to meet that lower standard. And we certainly believe we are one of those. Go ahead.
If we're going to do, get people to get involved, can we do in the email or tweet, or the Facebook or tweet, public health provides ABCD, were you aware? You can be a part of keeping public health in Waterloo Region or something like that, but just outline for them, because people will assume they're getting this thing and they're not really sure who it's coming from. So we need to clarify what we're protecting.
Okay, seeing no other questions, there is a recommendation with regards to the report, and that has been moved by Councillor Foxton. Oh, sorry, thank you very much. Already moved by Chair Redmond and seconded by Councillor McGarry. All in favor? And that's approved. We have another similar and not unrelated report before us, and the Chief's going to speak to that.
Good afternoon. And through the chair, I'm here to present a PHE PSV 2001 Paramedic Services Modernization Report. The Ontario government is proposing to transform the whole healthcare system, including emergency health services or paramedic services, to improve patient experience and strengthen local services. They envision a connected healthcare system and new models of care that will connect healthcare providers and services focused on patients, families, and community. It's a key to the success of the broader health system that emergency health services be strengthened, better coordinated, and modernized in order to respond to the changing needs in Ontario communities. That is why the government is also engaging paramedic services and municipalities in discussion regarding the new models of care, and that was for PHE PSV 19-10 report that we presented back in the fall, for select 911 medical emergency patients. This would allow paramedic services to expand treatment and transport options on scene to ensure patients are receiving the care that they need when and where they need it. This report is based on findings from the Auditor General, Provincial Dispatch Working Group, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, and the Ontario Association of Paramedic Chiefs, among others, who identified a list of extensive challenges that affect delivery of critical paramedic services. These challenges are consistent with those outlined in the Ministry's EMS Modernization Discussion Paper, which is attached as Appendix A to this report, and include outdated dispatch technologies, lengthy ambulance offload times and delays in transporting medically stable patients, lack of coordination among EHS system partners, need for innovative models that improve care, and health equity or access to service across regions and communities. The discussion paper raises specific questions on how to address these moving forward and gives paramedic services and municipalities across Ontario an opportunity to provide feedback to these issues via an online survey, which has a deadline of February 10th, 2020. In addition, the Ministry of Health is also convening the in-person consultation sessions with Mr. Jim Pine, the Special Advisor, and Alison Blair, the Assistant Deputy Minister, as another means through which paramedic services and municipalities can provide input to the questions posed for modernization to assist the government in shaping the modernization. Staff from the Ministry of Health have invited the Waterloo region to host a consultation session, which we just discussed the meeting on January 31st. Paramedic Services concurs with the discussion paper's identified challenges, which is impacting our local ability to provide effective and efficient service to the residents of Waterloo region. For many years, the region Waterloo Paramedic Services has dealt with growing offload delay issues, which has hampered our ability to respond to calls for service in the region. This is partly due to several of the issues identified in the report and a lack of progress on provincial initiatives to improve and modernize ambulance and dispatch services, such as delays in the implementation of the modernized dispatch technology. The Region of Waterloo Paramedic Services will participate in both the online survey and the consultation process with Jim Pine and Allison Blair and continue advocating for the above identified issues, keeping in mind our past requests for control over land ambulance dispatch at the regional level and maintaining land ambulance service at the municipal level. There are 7 recommendations contained in the report, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Councillor Lorenz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll certainly move the recommendation. I'd just like to speak to it briefly if I could. Thank you, Chief. Good report. I don't know how many times we've had to say this, but I would say that if this government seriously wants to embrace reform and change and make things better for the citizens in this community, that they would support all of these. And I don't know where we go if they don't after this, but I guess probably a change of government would be the step. But thank you very much. It's a very good report, and good luck with it.
I have one. I see no other questions. We have a sense that the province, well, I think you use the term, there's a reset, no foregone conclusions with regard to public health units. Do we have the same sort of sense on this issue, or?
So we haven't had a reset. We've hit, I think, what we would classify as a pause button for us, and we don't really know what that means. And from a provincial perspective, the Ontario Association of Paramedic Chiefs has been working hard in the background, gathering information and having stakeholder meetings with the chiefs across Ontario to present a position paper to Jim Pine and Allison Blair as well on behalf of the Paramedic Chiefs of Ontario. So that we're trying to keep in step with that as well as we go along, but we've had no indication from the government on any movement forward at this point, from my perspective.
Dr. Wayne?
Just to quickly add, unlike public health, which had an announced plan, for example, merging with other health units, there's never been anything announced in the first place for paramedic services. It was just announced that, they would consult to try to improve this system. So it's at a much earlier stage, I would say, or has been to date. So, so that's why I think the term reset wasn't used, because it really didn't start.
Thank you. Chair Redmond.
Just to add to the conversation, the technology piece of it is huge and something that I think there is a unified response to. I think because, as Shuli has mentioned, it had sort of less structure than the public health did. There's a little bit of more of a broken front, but this too, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario are lobbying to say, again, don't fix what isn't broken. And I think we can make a very cogent case as to why paramedics work in Waterloo Region and need to stay in Waterloo Region.
I see no other questions. There is a recommendation, and Councillor Foxton would like to move that. Seconded by Councillor Jowett. All in favor? And that's approved. Thank you. We're on to information and correspondence. Is there any other business? Councillor Radovich?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just wanted to take this opportunity, and right after I'm done speaking, I'll email the document to everyone, but to share with staff here and and members of Regional Council a housing needs assessment that we just completed at the City of Kitchener. It was really done for 2 reasons. It's the first time we've done a comprehensive needs assessment such as this, and it includes there's 13 sort of key findings that are found that have been identified, and you can see in the executive summary. But it's really been done partially as part of the joint study that is being done around inclusionary zoning with some of the other lower tier municipalities, but also as part of the affordable housing task force that came out of our own environic survey and the work that has been identified as part of our City of Kitchener strategic plan. All of that is really being done in concert of recognizing that this is a complex issue that's going to require both orders of local government, as well as the province, the feds, the private sector, the not-for-profit sector to sort of step up and help deal with it. I think you're going to find this an interesting read, if nothing else, the executive summary and some of the data that's included. I think some of that work is being done as part of the inclusionary zoning work that the other urban municipalities are doing in the region as well. And I just want to say that in addition to that, the regional staff, Mr. Pettipies, has been part of our task force. And from a municipal perspective, I mean, we're certainly very pleased with the fact that we have our new regional plan in place, and this will certainly allow us to continue to work together and move forward on this important issue. So I'll give this to the clerk to sort of officially leave a copy with the region. Thank you.
Thank you. It's really encouraging to see the city taking such an active role in this. If you haven't had a chance to read the AMO submission that they did back in the summer on affordable housing, although they were speaking to the province, their message was really very, very strong that this is not something that one level of government can possibly tackle, that it will require all levels of government as well as a lot of non-government players as well. All right. Our next meeting is Tuesday, February 11th. We are going to switch things up. We are going to break now and then come back for admin and finance after our lunch.
No, we can do it. We can start.
We are going to roll? Okay, then I'll leave it up to you to put us into closed session when you're done. Motion to adjourn. We need to be done by 1.
Yeah. What's the problem? Oh. Okay, let's call Admin and Finance to order. Any declaration of pecuniary interest? Any delegations? Seeing none. Presentations, none. Consent agenda, 2 items there. Can I have a mover and seconder? Councillor Jaworski, Councillor Kiefer. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Reports for information amendments to the Development Charges Act. Any questions on that? Seeing none. Okay, thank you. Service review, this recommendation, this was at a previous meeting, and then it went back to the service review ad hoc committee, steering committee, and we reviewed it, and it came up with a whole bunch of recommendations in concert with staff that are attached to your report today. Mr. Murray?
Yeah, just a couple of really brief comments to echo what Chair Strickland said. I think the steering committee had a really engaged discussion about what should the region do with each of the 19 or 20 recommendations that came out of the KPMG report. And the attachment to the report, these big pages, lay out the proposed direction on each of those 20 opportunities. Some of them basically involve carrying on with the current approach to service delivery and funding. Some of them involve regional staff from corporate performance and from the program area undertaking a bit of a review. Those are mostly on ones that are of smaller value, where we just didn't think it was cost effective to go and engage a consultant. And then there's a few where the recommendation from the steering committee is we need to do a deeper dive, and we need to go out, we need to engage a consultant to do a deeper dive. And some of those are, I would say, high priority. One is looking at how we deliver childcare services. So that'll be one that gets launched ASAP. Another opportunity is how we provide kind of facilities maintenance services, including how we do all our maintenance on Waterloo Region housing, and that's another urgent one. That's pretty big scope, and that's one where the steering committee and staff all agreed we'd benefit from engaging an outside consultant. The ones where we're engaging outside consultant, we would pursue funding from the province through their audit and accountability fund. And I think on all of these, we've laid out some target timelines to bring reports back to council. A lot of it over 2020, and some of it sliding into 2021. So if you've got questions, I or Craig or Jane will try to answer them, and members of the steering committee as well.
Great, thanks very much, Mr. Murray. And just to add to that, I would agree that it was a very good discussion and that we took a comprehensive approach. The one thing we also really emphasized that we have deadlines, so you'll see for all those actions have some firm deadlines attached to them. Okay, thanks. So is there a motion there? Can I have a mover and seconder? Councillor Foxton, Councillor Schatz, all those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Public engagement feedback, that's for information on page 33. Any questions on that? Councillor Harris.
This goes red. Yeah, hi, thanks. One thing I did notice with that, and perhaps for next year just to leave as an asterisk, is that I did notice that there was a fairly low number in respondents, I think, when it came to these surveys, I believe. And I just wanted to know if there's a way we can have more outreach, particularly to our business community, so that we can get a more robust representation of our community when it comes to public engagement feedback, specifically as it relates to budget.
Mr. Dyer?
Go ahead, Craig.
Yes, so through you, Mr. Chair. So as we've noted in the report, this is the third year that we've completed an online portion of the public engagement for the budget. We're, I would say, somewhat encouraged that each year we've been able to increase the level of response. Last year, I think it was 485. This year was just a little bit over 550. So I think, we're generally pleased that we're seeing more response. I think we did have a pickup near the end. We put some extra notices out, I think both through the website, on Twitter, to get just to get a higher response. But we'll continue to look for ways of getting the most response as possible, so that the output and outcome is as meaningful as possible to council.
Yeah, thank you for that. Like, as simple as sending an email to the Chamber of Commerce, Communitech, affordable housing groups, asking them to forward the survey information to their members. So I think that's a good idea. All right, thank you. Information correspondence, that's there. Any questions or comments on that? Other business, it says our next meeting's February 11th, but don't forget we have our budget meeting next week, January 22nd at 4 o'clock. Be there or be square. And before we adjourn, we're actually going into caucus. So I need a motion to go into closed session to deal with labor relations issues. Councillor Harris, Councillor Jowett, all those in favor? That's carried. Any other items, any other business? Okay, motion to adjourn. Councillor McGarry, Councillor Kiefer, all those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much, everyone.
And Mr. Chair, since I'm not seeing Chris, oh, there's Chris. Chris, you want to just talk about your plan for lunch?
So lunch is chips. So I think the chips are all on your desk. And so you can go and get your lunch, and we'll convene in the office room.
So bring your lunch into the caucus room. Yes.
Bring your lunch into Waterloo.
She said chips, that's all it is.
No.
That's